that pretty much ended your career right there and then?
Yeah, that was it, basically. And I just sort of soldiered on for another couple of years, going nowhere. He said, basically, you're staying here, you're holding up promotion. I said, oh, thanks very much. Stick it up your arse. And I mean, so that was sort of out of SAS. Anyway, I get a lot of people now coming to see me to help them. And over the last few years, had they got away with it, they would have shortchanged the troops about $3 million.
Whereabouts were you born?
I was born in Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, in the goldfields.
Well, what happened in high school?
Well, see, high school, my family disintegrated. I was 13. I was in first year high school, and my mother and father split up. They split. My family, my brothers and sisters were sort of like farmed out to different relatives. I lived on my own. I was 13. I lived in a shed in the back, in a lady's backyard. So I left school. I got my first job when I was 13. Stacking shelves. It was a storeman's job, you know, as a 13-year-old. How much work would you be doing, you know? And I used to work a full day like everybody else. And then the people that I worked for ran an engineering part of their business. So I went to the boss at 14 and I said, listen, I want to be an apprentice. So that was the next step. I had to wait till I was 15. So I then started an apprenticeship as an apprentice welder. So, and then I graduated from my shed to actually getting a little bit more money, and I could actually go and board at people's place. But I thought, it was on a production line, and I thought, I'm not learning nothing here, you know, this is rubbish. And I soon got sick of that, so I pulled the pin. I said, well, that's it, I'm not being an apprentice anymore. So, I mean, that was sort of a bit unheard of in those days, you know, you don't, but I did, you know. I said, no, that's enough. And not long after that, I joined the military. So, I mean, it was just one of those things. I mean, you don't plan to do it. It was just, oh yeah, this looks good, I'll join that.
Did you have to go through any sort of a testing process to join up?
Yeah. With the, you went in there and did their written tests. You did that. You had a medical. You had a psych interview with psychologists and different people from the military. And then, like the enlistment officer, if you like, as he was, it was generally an officer. You had those interviews, and then you obviously got to pass that sort of each stage. And then you were told whether you were in or out. And generally you got a letter to say, yeah, you've been successful and your enlistment date will be such and such a day. And then they tell you where to report to, all that sort of stuff. When I went, the time I went, they actually took us in, enlisted, you know, you swear the oath of allegiance and all that sort of stuff. And then we had a week that we were actually in the military before we would actually go to New South Wales to do our recruit training. So basically we were enlisted in the military, but we weren't soldiers, we were just young fellas, you know, and they actually had to find work to do. So I think we ended up out in one of the camps out Army Reserve places, sort of. I think they were going on an exercise and they just needed people to load trucks and stuff like that. So we ended up doing that for a week or so.
So what were your first impressions of Kapuka?
Bewilderment. I mean, you get off the bus and you got these blokes bellowing at you, and it's just funny. You think back to it, and it's all about discipline and stuff like that. But you get off and you're lined up, and here you got to go there, and I mean, you arrive there, and especially for us from WA, you're fairly tired, and you're getting there at 6 o'clock at night, and what they've got to do is get you squared away and up to you where you're going to be living, and all bedded down, etc., etc. You know, so consequently, that sort of thing comes into it. No, and obviously the people that were there, the military people, the ones that were the instructors, etc., had been through it and they knew the drill. You know, so everything moved like that. You know, boom, boom, boom. And so consequently, you know, it's how things work. You know, you line up in a corridor in the barracks. You know, there were 3 brick barracks, 3 stories, and our platoon was on the middle story. I can't remember, something like that. And you lined up in the hallway, and they said, right, there's 4 people to a room, and when I say go, I want you to get in your room. Doesn't matter what room, doesn't matter who you are. I know if there's 5 people end up in the room, one's got to get out. So, and everyone's sort of trying, and that's what happens. Then all of a sudden, you look around, you got 4 guys there with you, and they're the guys that you share a room with. I mean, it was an easy way of doing it. There was none of this, oh, I'm going in this one and that one. It was just bang, and you went, and that was that. It was all over in a couple of seconds. So consequently, you ended up sharing rooms with people you didn't. Well, I think there was 2 West Australian guys in my room that I travelled with. It was just that you happened to be near that room, so you went into the closest one. You know, so yeah, so that's how the rooms were allocated. But when you think back, it's probably the best way. There's no fiddling around; it just all happens.
So what was an average day like?
It was pretty hard and pretty full on, I would think. I mean, once you started, I mean, the first few days were sort of a bit, yeah, you had to be issued with equipment, clothing, all that sort of stuff. Pack all your civilian clothes away in a suitcase that you had with you. That was all put away. And then all you had was military equipment and clothing in your locker. Then you had to learn how to make your bed the military way, how to set out your locker the military way. You know, everything had to be squared away. You know, even down to when you hang your clothes, all the hangers are all the same way. So all that sort of thing has to be taught. And I mean, you know, like you only was shown once. There was no, and then there's no excuse. I mean, they do all that sort of thing. So then the inspections happen, and they get harder and harder and harder because you're learning things, the process. So consequently, you're doing those sorts of things, but at the same time, you're starting to learn military drill, if you like, as drill, you know, on the parade ground, stuff like that. And that's sort of, it's a bit repetitious, you know, because that's how you learn. And so all that's happening all at the same time. So you've got all this learning curve happening. So everything you do is new to you, every single thing, because you've never done it before, because you've never been in the military. So consequently, everything's learning. And so your days are pretty full on. And I mean, you know, you'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that was it was quite, when you think back there, it was quite funny. Like you'd have to, 6 o'clock in the morning, reveille would sound, which meant that you had to get out of bed and go down and have your first parade on the parade ground. Now you had to parade down there. It didn't matter what you wore. You could wear your jocks or whatever, but you always had to have a sheet around your neck, one of your bed sheets, because what that meant was that you weren't just pulling up your bed. Yeah, so you took a sheet off your bed, put it around your neck, and paraded. So when you went back, you had to actually physically make your bed properly because you had the sheet, see? And so all that sort of thing used to happen. And then that's what had happened. That's your first parade, 6 o'clock, and then you'd be back. You'd have to clean up your room, get everything squared away, and then it's breakfast. And you'd have to be ready between 6 and 8. What had to happen was your room had to be cleaned, the whole barracks block had to be cleaned and polished. The bath ablution block, as it was called, at the end of there was toilets and showers and all that all had to be cleaned, and you made up little teams to do it, and all had to be. And when I say clean, I mean it wasn't just a lick and a promise; it was clean, and the hallway had to be polished every morning. I mean it was high shine. All your gear, your room, had to be the same, and that happened every morning between 6 and 8 because and then you had to have breakfast. All that happened between 6 and 8, and then you were on parade ready to start by 8 o'clock, and that's when you did whatever you had lessons. You might have had drill, parade ground stuff, weapons, learning military, like map reading, all that sort of stuff.
How well did you adapt to army discipline?
Well, I think I was all right. I never had any problem to it. I mean, army discipline is quite simple. You just do as you're told and keep your mouth shut. Easy, But if I mean, the thing is if you've got somebody in your outfit that's a mouth, they can make it pretty hard for everybody. And if you're a good instructor, as I learnt later, I mean, things sort themselves out within the group because you as an instructor sort of encourage maybe sometimes that to happen. And that's what happens is people that are mouthy and all that soon learn that maybe it's not a good idea to continue that practice.
How long were you at Kapuka?
You do, 10 weeks, I think, which is just over 2 months, 2.5 months. You do your initial recruit training. And then once you've completed that, then you go on to your job training, which is another 3 odd months.
What job training did you go on to?
Well, I was in the infantry, so you go on and learn to be an infantry soldier, and that's what it is that you have a choice. In those days, you could have a choice of to what branch of the service or corps that you wanted to be go to. I mean, in those days, because of Vietnam, there was obviously a high ratio went to infantry because they needed infantry soldiers. But then you could pick the other corps, and they, I mean, despite what a lot of people say, they tried to accommodate you as best they could. I wanted to be in infantry, so there was no reason to think that I wouldn't go there. And same with a lot of people in the outfit that I was with wanted to be in infantry, so there was quite a lot. There was some wanted to be in armoured corps. They got to go to the armoured corps, which is the tanks and things like that. Sometimes the army would put you in a place where they thought you would be best suited due to your intelligence or whatever. Whilst you're at Kapuka, you're still undergoing those type of tests as part of the training. You go to the psych and do a psych sort of evaluations. So that was all part of the training whilst you're there. But I went off and became an infantry soldier, and I went from Kapuka down to Ingleburn, which was the infantry centre at that time, or the School of Infantry as they called it, and that's just out of Liverpool in Sydney. So, and it was quite a big base there. There was the Ingleburn School of Infantry, there was the hospital there, military hospital, and other sundry units. So you spent nearly 3 months.
So what was the course structure for infantry training?
Well, you basically went there and learnt basic infantry skills, which is, it's basically how to survive in a war. But there's certain skills that you need, like how to conduct yourself in the field. How to move, and what you got to realise that at that stage, the emphasis was on jungle warfare, because Australia had a commitment in Vietnam They had a commitment in Malaysia. They'd just come out of, in 66, 67, there was a commitment in Borneo and places like that where they had a confrontation with Indonesia. So in our region, the commitment seemed to be on jungle warfare. So consequently, what you had there was guys that had actually been to some of these conflicts, etc., as the instructors, and they were bringing back their experiences and how they operated in those type of places, and passing those experiences on, in the form of lessons, and you'd practice those lessons. I mean, when I say practice, it was a physical type work that you would have. Well, for instance, you'd have a contact drill, what they called a contact drill. So if you contacted the enemy, you're patrolling along and you contacted the enemy, well, there's a certain drills that you have to go through to either overwhelm that target or withdraw from the target or things like that. So those drills had to be second nature, and consequently there's a laid down format of those exercises. But obviously, as you move through your soldiering things, those things are modified, if you like, to suit different environments. So they're the sort of things that you learn.
Can you describe the daily routine during your infantry training?
Yeah, infantry training was basically the same as the recruit training. Whereas you had a syllabus, you had subjects to cover, and those subjects were, as I described before, learning the basic skills of an infantry soldier. Now, all those skills are bushcraft, map reading, how to survive in the bush, what to do, what not to do, how to move around the bush, or the jungle in this case, and how to live out there for extended periods of time. I mean, and then it went on for different things, like everybody had to, you learn how to work, use a radio, because your communications, how to contact aircraft, all that sort of stuff. As an infantry soldier, you had to learn how to do. Because unlike some armies, the Australian Army, I think, is probably one of the better ways to, because everyone is cross-trained, if you know what I mean. Everybody knows a little bit about everybody's job. So therefore, if somebody is wounded or killed or whatever, you would like to think that, things go on, especially if you're in the middle of a contact. You can't just all stop, Barleys, we've got a guy hurt. So all that sort of thing needs to be learnt, because it's one of those things that you just, I mean, the only thing that you might have pre-learnt if you're a farmer's son or something like that, how to shoot rifles, etc. But other than that, most of the stuff had to be pre-learnt.
What kind of weapons training did you do?
Well, you have weapons training on your standard issue weapons, like at that time it was the SLR. Then you've got training on machine guns and things like that. So the basic issue weapons, or the weapons that were in use at the time, you had to be sort of learn how to use, because there's no telling when you would have to use them. So, and everything like that had to be, like at Kapuka, you learnt the basic weapon skills of the weapons that were on issue at the time. When you went to infantry training, because as an infantry soldier your bread and butter is weapons, you went that little bit further. Whereas if you, at Kapuka, you'd learn the basics, and if you went off to be a cook or something like that, well, obviously the emphasis on weapons is not the same as an infantry soldier. And the same as if you went to artillery, you would learn how to then, cannon, heavy guns and things like that, and your emphasis is not on small arms, whereas an infantry soldier, the weapon of choice was of issue, if you like. So consequently, you had to learn all that, and that was your basic bread and butter. So day-to-day things were those sort of things. You did weapons lessons, field craft, all that sort of stuff. So that was how your days were made up.
What about explosives?
Well, the emphasis you had basic instruction on different mines and things like that, how to set up a claymore mine and all that sort of stuff. But there wasn't a lot of emphasis on that because on explosives you have specialists to do that, and that's a different course again. I mean, you go to, when you get posted to your unit, if they wanted you to learn explosives and how to set charges and things like that, well, they sent you off on courses to do that. So the emphasis on infantry at the infantry school wasn't that much.
What can you tell me about the SLR?
Oh, it was a good weapon. I thought it was quite heavy for what it was, but I mean, when you compare that to the M16 Armalite, because that was sort of the American weapon that the Australian Army were introducing at the time, and that was sort of made up of Bakelite or plastic or whatever. Bakelite, I suppose. But that was quite light, and it was a different calibre, whereas the SLR had wood stock and that. But I thought it was a good weapon. It was a powerful weapon, hard-hitting, and is now in the museum. I mean, you're getting old when the weapon that you used, you go to a museum and a military museum, and it's in there. You got to think, but no, it was a good weapon. And I often see some of the third world countries now running around with the SLR. It was like the AK-47, which was the weapon of choice of, the AK-47 is weapon of choice of terrorists, I think, but it's a good weapon, and it's lasted all these years. And they're still running around with an AK. You see them running around with AK-47s. It's the same calibre as the SLR, 7.62. And the reason it's a weapon of choice is because it's a very robust, easy to handle weapon, as was the SLR. But they go on to other weapons.
What are the differences between the AK-47 and the SLR?
Well, the AK-47 is a much smaller weapon. It's not as long. The round, even though it's the same calibre, like the rounds from an AK-47, the bullets won't fit an SLR because are made differently. Rimless sort of cartridge. The SLR had a NATO type thing, and so they could make the rounds for all the countries as opposed to just. Whereas the AK-47, which was developed by a Russian, Kalashnikov, that had a different round, so you couldn't. There was no interchange. But the AK-47 was probably easier to handle because it wasn't as long. I mean, when we went to Vietnam, we modified ours, so they would be easier to handle.
Oh, I might ask you about that a bit later on in the story. Did you use any other machine guns during your...
Yeah, the general purpose machine gun M60, which is an American weapon, we learned how to use that. That was the same calibre as the SLR, 7.62. In actual fact, you could use the same rounds. They came in, it was a belt-fed machine gun, very hard-hitting and very accurate type weapon, and was a section weapon in an infantry section. Generally, there was a machine gun carried. They were quite a heavy weapon, so you always had the biggest and strongest guy. But some guys used to volunteer to carry carry the gun, as it was called, you know, and they liked it. Whereas I never took that much of a shine to it because it was heavy. But it was a good static weapon as well. It was used for both. It was, you know, you'd carry it around out in the bush, and that was your part of your firepower. Or it was a static weapon that would be set up on a sentry post, and that would be your weapon if you set up a point where where you'd be camped, if you like. The sentries would have an M60, or one of the weapons would be taken out onto the perimeter.
So what happened at the completion of the infantry training?
Well, once you completed that, they then allocated you to a unit, which was going to be your unit. And in my case, it was 7 Battalion. Some of the guys went to 2 Battalion. And generally, as I say, we were the guys that were sort of, it was like the guys that went to 2 Battalion, they were going up there to rebuild that battalion. Because at that stage, Australia had a commitment of 3 battalions in Vietnam. I think it was 3, yeah. So consequently, they rotated 3 battalions through Vietnam. So they'd come, 1 battalion would come back, they'd lose, obviously people would get out, there'd be national servicemen that have completed their 2 years or whatever. People that had transferred to other places, you know, go on and become instructors or whatever. So consequently, out of the infantry centre, you got posted to a battalion. And I got posted to 7 Battalion, which wasn't that far away. It was in Holsworthy, which was just the other side of Liverpool, whereas Ingleburn was one side, Liverpool, Holsworthy was the other. So we didn't have to go far at all, but so we were just taken over there, packed your gear, went over there and set up shop there, basically. There's your room. And I mean, that was the difference. Yeah, you were sort of now into the real army where they'd say, there's your room, square yourself away, you know, and that was it. You had nobody shouting and screaming at you, looking over your shoulder, whatever, you know, you were in the sort of real army. And I mean, you could be sharing a room with a married guy that, I mean, the rooms were generally, they either had 2 or 4 people in them, and 2 of the guys might be married, so they live in the married quarters, you know. They go home, you know. So that was, so that things started changing, you know. You're actually in the job, if you like. So consequently, that was the start of that. We were sent to 7 Battalion, allocated to a company, because each battalion is made up of A, B, C, D company, and so you were allocated to a company. Now, in this build-up process, you were allocated to a company, and then as the build-up went on, you might have gone off to a specialist area, like I was, as we built up, I was posted to the signal platoon, which meant that my responsibility at that time was communications. And Graham, he was posted to Pioneer Platoon, which the Pioneer Platoon are the ones that do explosives, build things, chop things down. You know, like if the battalion needed a helicopter pad out in the bush, the Pioneers would do it. You know, they'd clear the area, cut the trees, do this, do that. That was their job. Anything that needed to be blown up, they'd do that. So that was the Pioneer Platoon, whereas I was in the Signal Platoon in 7 Battalion, and my responsibility, as I said, was communication. So me as a signal person would be allocated to, well, I could be allocated anywhere. Generally, the Signal Platoon were allocated to a company, and they would be with company headquarters with the commanding officer or the officer commanding of that company. So therefore, you'd be in touch with all the other guys. So that's how the communication worked. Yeah.
Why did you go in that direction?
Well, you just put there. There was no choice. It just said, oh, you. I mean, as a young guy, you know, you put there and you think, oh, yeah, this is not bad, so you stay there. But there was probably no reason I couldn't have said, well, I don't particularly like this. I want to go to mortar platoon, learn how to use mortars, or I'd like to go to pioneer platoon. I didn't think pioneer platoon was that good because they used to do all the hard work. And I mean, who volunteers for hard work? But I mean, or you could go to a rifle company where the rifle companies, like A company, B company, that's what they did. They were riflemen, and they used to go out on patrol and do that sort of stuff. Whereas if I was in signal platoon, I'd go to the company headquarters and maintain the communications, etc. I could have said, oh, I don't particularly want to do this. I want to go to a rifle company, be in a platoon, be in the section, and do that. But anyway, I was allocated the signal platoon, but I didn't stay there that long because whilst I was there, the selection board for the SAS came around, and Graham was going to come with me, but I think he was doing a course or something like that. He wasn't there when the selection board came around. I actually fronted the selection board and was selected to go, and I told him that I was, and he said, oh, I'll come in the next selection board, because they used to come around quite often. Well, when I say often, not, they might come around twice a year.
And what sort of things would they ask you as part of the selection panel?
Well, when the selection panel came, you had to, on that selection panel was generally the officer commanding of the squadron that was doing the recruiting, a psych, and there's one other, and that could be made up of anybody, the RSM of the regiment or another officer, but there was generally a panel of three. And some of the questions they ask, I really can't remember a lot of the questions that they ask, but I mean, things like, I can remember me being a West Australian, came up was that the only reason you're applying is because you want to get home to mum, and I said, well, nothing can be further from the truth, and that's how I can remember answering it this way, saying that, I'd been living on my own since I was 13, and so I was quite independent of the family, and had been since then, so that wasn't an issue. I was going over there. If you're going to be a soldier, you want to be the best one you can be. And they were touted to be the best soldiers in the Australian Army, so that's where I wanted to be.
So when you finally got through the medical and the psychological, what was the next step as far as being transferred into the SAS?
Oh yeah, so once you got through the selection, you were notified that you were selected, brought over to Western Australia, and then you started the selection course. Now you had to pass that selection course now, and that selection procedure probably lasted about 6 months, I guess, by the time you finished.
So it's a pretty long selection process.
Yeah, well, see, the selection process included a parachute course as well, which you had to pass that as well. So that was part of the selection process. So so you came over and then you just started that selection process. Now that selection process was a lot of physical type running, fitness type stuff. There was a lot of you had to learn things the SAS way. You're an infantry soldier, but then you were going up the next level, which the SAS tactics are a little different. You had to learn to live like an SAS soldier. Because the differences are that you're operating in smaller groups. You've got to be self-sufficient. You've got to be out there and look after yourselves. That's both mentally, physically, health-wise, the whole lot. So consequently, you were trained in different specialties, and that was your role within that group. And the idea was to have everybody cross-trained so everybody knew a little bit of everybody else's job.
Were you treated differently as an SAS rookie, so to speak, than a normal infantry rookie?
No, basically when you're doing the selection course, it's basically you know, you were treated with respect, but I mean, you were treated like somebody that was trying out for the best outfit, you know, and so consequently you were expected to give your best. You know, there was no, you know, I mean, you could get through a selection course, you mightn't run 2 kilometres or 2 miles in the quickest time, but as long as you didn't give up, you know. So that's the sort of thing, the mentality that they were trying to develop is one of mental toughness, one of never say die, basically, because, I mean, some things in the field can be very harrowing, you know, and I mean, very exhaustive. And I mean, there's the story of the SAS guys in Borneo where they had a 4-man patrol where one of them got gored by an elephant, you know. I mean, a rogue elephant gored him. So, and they were in an area that they, you know, in that confrontation, and consequently they had to get him out. They couldn't. There was no air support. So you're in mountainous country with a guy that's dying, and you've got to get him out. I mean, it's pretty harrowing, and that's when your mental toughness it comes to the fore, you know, and that's when your leadership. What do? Do you leave the guy and save 3 years, or do you leave a guy that can look after him and you go for help and bring back help? Because that's going to take you 2 or 3 days to do that. So all those sorts of things you go, and that's what that type of selection process tries to identify in people, and they're the type of people I would think that they want. You know, I guess they have a critique on people's attitudes. I mean, there's not much point in getting halfway through a task and throwing your hands in the air. So they didn't want people like that, you know, and there was a few people on our selection course that were asked to leave because of those reasons. And at the end of the day, once you got through that process, well, then they sent you to go and do a para course. And I mean, jumping out of a perfectly good aeroplane is not a natural thing. So consequently, that was part of the thing too. So there was people that if you didn't pass, if you froze or anything like that, or didn't jump, you were immediately removed from the para course, and consequently you didn't go back to SAS because you had to be parachute trained. So consequently, that was all part of the deal. So that was all bringing in that, you know, that mental toughness, if you like. Whereas you're doing something that you don't particularly, not that keen on, but I think they used to say, all the reports were, this man is nervous but controlled. That's a good way of saying you're shitting yourself.
Shitting yourself, but you got through it.
Yeah, exactly. You leapt out of the plane. Or you departed the plane, put it that way. How you departed it sort of was debatable at some points.
Well, how did they put you through that parachute course?
That was done in Williamtown in New South Wales, which was a fighter base at that stage, which is just out of Newcastle. And you went over there and you did a lot of ground training before you even went near an aircraft. Ground training being the drills in the air, how you conduct yourself in the aircraft with a parachute, because you've got to do different checks and all that sort of thing. So you do that, and it's repetitious every day. And that's, again, you have your syllabus, you do this, you do that, you do this, you do that, exit drills, and then they've got towers there, where the Polish tower was the highest one. That was I can't remember, 200 feet in the air. And the idea is you had like a boom over the top of it with a couple of harnesses on it. So consequently, you'd hook up to the harness, and they'd have there was like a stand up the top of it, and they'd pull the gate, and you'd just swing out, you know. And then you'd have to do your drill, flight drills as they called them, in the air, and then they'd just take the brake off, and you'd come down. You know. You probably, they have the Polish Tower, as it was called, has been around for years, and they actually used to. I've seen a few in the old Second World War movies. You see them, or maybe the ones that were made after the Second World War. The Polish Tower, and they got what they call exit towers. That's how you practice to get out of the aircraft. So that was ongoing, and then you did your jumps, and to qualify you had to do 8.
And how did you go through the process?
Oh, yeah, you just battled on, you know. It was quite punishing. When I say punishing, we were quite lucky in as much as that we come straight off the selection course to that, so we were really fit. But see, you had guys on the course that maybe come from infantry battalions or different other areas, because the course wasn't just made up of SAS people. So they weren't as fit, I guess, but so it was quite punishing, and in as much as that you're hanging from the roof on harnesses and all that sort of stuff. So, but I mean, you get through it, and then basically you just want to get, it gets to the point, like anything, you can train for so long, but then you want to do it. I mean, it's a bit like anything. You can train and train and train and train, but eventually you want to do it, what you're actually training for. So consequently, you get to that point where you think, oh, let's get on with this, you know. So, and that's what it was. Yeah, as I say, you had to do 8 jumps to qualify as a parachutist.
Were there any sorts of unusual exercises that you would do at Swanbourne or other places around the state as part of the training?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's also, depending on what we used to go around, you do exercises at Bindoon, which are just sort of honing the skills that you've learnt. I mean, I can remember going to, there's a place up in Boyer, which is, I don't know if it's still there, but there's cliffs up there, and you're sort of roping down the cliffs and all that sort of stuff. And I can remember doing exercises. Well, it's now the Maritime Museum. It used to be a derelict building once, and I mean, we were doing hostage and siege situations back then, and we were actually showing the police how we would do as a military exercise, and then because see, as a military exercise, if the military are called in, I mean, that's the last thing. I mean, and lethal action, if you like, will be used. That's the end of it. There's no two ways about it, because that's what the military called in for.
Just getting back to your initial training with the SAS, before you actually went to the parachute in Williamstown. What would you think would be the most difficult thing about that initial training period, where they were really sussing you out whether or not you were good enough?
I think the physical stuff was fairly difficult, because you had, and it happened to me a couple of times, I mean, you had a distance to run, say 6 kilometres or 6 mile, whatever it was at that stage. And a lot of this was done at Rottnest. And so consequently you'd have to run from this point to that point. And at that point was the truck that would take you back to camp, or back to what is now holiday thing, Kingston Barracks it is. Anyway, what you do is you'd set off and you'd run, and they say, right, where the truck is, you had to be there at a certain time. If you weren't there to hop on the truck, well, the truck drove off and you ran back. so consequently you double your running, and you had to be back and ready to go at 8 o'clock or whatever the time was, just like everybody else that had come back on the truck. So consequently that sort of gave you a little bit of incentive to get to the truck on time. But that happened. So that was, I mean, that's there saying, well, you know, you just can't give up. You've got to be back. You've got to do this. You've got to do that, you know. And I mean, the thing is that you'd have to come back and then do your PT with the rest of them, you know. Yeah, so that was pretty hard. I mean, the normal weapons lessons and things like that were interesting, and as an infantry soldier, I was quite, you know, because you'd done a lot of that stuff. And see, they've got to take it to the basic common denominator, whereas the people that apply for SAS don't necessarily come from infantry. You know, they can come from all different branches of the service. So they have to have the basic knowledge given to them, whereas me and others were infantry soldiers, and we knew a lot of the basic stuff. But I mean, it was part of the teaching. So but the physical side of things was quite hard. There was a lot of stuff done where you had to do it on your own, like finding a way around it with a map and a compass. I mean, that could be in the day or the night. And you weren't allowed to team up with anybody. You had to do it on your own. Check different checkpoints, all that sort of stuff. I mean, they then used to do it in Stirling Ranges down in Albany, or down that way, Parongraps or whatever. And that was quite a hard thing, because the terrain, you know, you got that to battle against. You've got, you know, your map and compass, and you got to be at checkpoints, and yeah, so all that sort of stuff. So the physical demands were probably the hardest, I think. And that was sort of this mental toughness I was talking about. And that's how it is. You just got to learn to keep going and not give up. And find alternatives of how to do things.
How did they inform you of being successful within the selection?
Oh, you were marched in and told. You know, marched before the Carter commander or the selection course chief instructor, and they give you a course critique. Also told you whether you're selected or you've been selected, but you need to work on these sort of things and and that's how you were told. Consequently, after that, you were presented on a parade with your beret, and then you took up a position in where you was going to be, you know, in a squadron and a troop. You know, like there's troops. The squadron's made up of troops, like A, B, C, and D troop in some cases. But so you made up, and then you were made up in a patrol, a 5-man patrol. So it was broken down. You know. So consequently, after your beret presentation, you were posted to a squadron, then posted to a troop, and took up a position in the patrol. And that's when you form these sort of, you train together all the time then. Yeah.
What was it like to receive the beret?
Oh, it's good. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those achievement points of your life where you've achieved, and I mean, you've gone through that achievement process, which is a pretty hard process, and I mean, it's one of those things where everyone says, "Oh, our selection course was the hardest," but I mean, all selection courses are hard. It doesn't matter you're doing it today or you did it 20 years ago.
Where were you posted once you were officially a member of the SAS?
I was posted to one squadron, A troop, and so there was one squadron. There was 3 squadrons at that stage, and I went to one squadron. And during those days, there was a squadron rotating through Vietnam. So that was the same as the infantry battalions. There was one squadron there, one squadron at home, building up, and one squadron that had just come back. So you were posted. I did the selection course and were posted to the squadron that was building up.
So one squadron was building up?
Yeah, at that stage to take over in Vietnam.
How long did you spend with the squadron building up?
It would have been just under 12 months. It was the same. It was actually paralleling, as it turned out, 7 Battalion, which I came from. So they were sort of building up because, as it turned out, their advance party left on the same plane as we did as a squadron to go to Vietnam. So it was all happening around the same time. But we went off. We sort of built up over that 12-month period. And
how did you build up?
Well, obviously, like, you had to get your skills. I went off and did a medical course, which it was a fairly more detailed than just the everyday run-of-the-mill course, because I was the patrol medic. I was responsible to looking after the health of the patrol and carrying all the drugs and stuff like that, medications. So consequently, I went off and did that. Other guys went off and did signal courses, etc., etc. You got the basics of those other things. So if anything happened to people, you could actually carry out some of their tasks.
Can you describe that course?
The medical course? Oh yeah, that was done at Healesville in Victoria, which there's ice in on the fire buckets there, so we're not doing too bad here. Really cold place, Healesville in Victoria. It was about, I can't remember how long the course went for. It was quite a long course. I'm talking months as opposed to weeks. A couple of months, I think it went.
Can you describe the course?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we had. It just, like any course, there was a syllabus, and you learnt how to treat people. You learnt giving injections. How to look for signs and symptoms. The signs and symptoms of different things like heat exhaustion, sunstroke, all that sort of stuff. Anything to do with what you might encounter as a patrol medic in Vietnam, or anywhere for that matter. It wasn't focused on Vietnam, even though Vietnam was going. But I mean, you might be on an exercise in the middle of Australia and somebody gets sick. They might have appendicitis or anything like that. So they were the sort of things you had to be able to learn and identify, and then either get people out of the place or whatever. In the case of actually people being wounded or anything, you had to learn how to sort of look after them, get them ready for evacuation, all that sort of stuff. So, and then there was the drug side of things, what drugs you could use, how to use them, what dosages, all that sort of stuff you had to take on board, whereas a normal military medic wouldn't have to do that, because that would be a doctor's role.
What kind of drugs were you learning to handle?
Oh, well, see, there was painkillers. You had to know how to do that, like Fortral or morphine. There was sort of adrenaline things for adrenaline, because we had those type of injections. There was a number of other drugs, and I just can't remember what they were, but basically for infections and things like that. But you had both tablets, etc., so you had to know what they were, how to identify them and all that, and also you had your injections, which mainly focused on if people were injured or hurt and you had to kill the pain things like that, like as I say, Fortral morphine. There was what was it, Diloxin, I think it was called. I can't remember now, but that was like antibiotics, things like that. Because what you've got to realise is that as a patrol medic in SAS, you could be out in an environment that you're it, and you're it for a couple of weeks. So consequently, that was what the focus was, is to be able to give you enough knowledge to maintain a small group in a remote locality. And that's what said on your certificate when you completed the course was qualified to practice medicine qualified to not practice medicine, but it was qualified something medicine in remote localities, you know. So almost, yeah. So that's what the qualification was, and then you had to, like there was a course, you know, the whole thing was anatomy and physiology and all that sort of stuff. You had to know and learn.
How many other participants were there in the course?
On the course, they were actually all SAS people, because it was an SAS Med-Aid course, as they called it, because they are run differently and there's different things to learn than a normal course for people that are posted to the medical corps, if you like. So there was probably about 25 people on the course, maybe 20, and they were all SAS blokes. What they were was guys like myself that had joined the regiment and were getting a skill. There was other guys that had maybe come back from Vietnam, and their squadron was, you know, the squadron that was come back, they were obviously getting people that were going to stay in, another skill. So yeah, all those sorts of things. So there was probably about 20 people on the course.
What was it like interacting with the other blokes on the course?
Oh, great, yeah. Because you're all part of the same thing. You know, you're all going to do the same thing. And I mean, there was I found it quite interesting because I hadn't been away at that stage, and there was guys on the course that had just come back from overseas in Vietnam. So you sort of got a bit of a picture of what was going on. And these, I mean, the thing about the SAS regiment is that everybody's done the same thing. They've all had to pass the selection course to get there. So consequently, there was no "I'm a bit better than you" attitude. There was an attitude, and see, most of the guys were quite willing to share their experiences, because who knows, you might join their patrol. So consequently, they want somebody that's a bit switched on as well. Yeah, so sharing their knowledge was nothing. Yeah, and that's how it was. And that's how it should have been, and it was like that.
So what else was happening in the build-up in the squadron?
Yeah,
outside of the medic course?
Oh, well, there was all that sort of thing. There was other guys doing signal courses. I guess there was a lot of other administrative type things happening that I wasn't privy to. A lot of stores and that being procured, and all that sort of build-up was happening. People, as I say, were off on courses, doing different courses. We were actually, you'd come back together and do squadron-type exercises, whether it be down in the south in the rainforests, down Collie area. I mean, I had to do a patrol course, which it was part of the deal, I guess. A lot of the guys had in the squadron did the patrol, what they call a patrol course, and that took your patrolling techniques to a higher level, which you were taught by instructors from the SAS, and you were scrutinised fairly closely on the way you conducted yourself in the bush on patrol, because they had to know, even though you'd been through the selection, you'd been through your infantry training, and this was just another at a higher level again. and you had to be pretty switched on because nobody was going to take you in their patrol if you were banging and clattering around in the bush. So you'd find yourself out of a job. And you had what they call directing staff with each patrol. You took turns in being the patrol commander. You had a patrol made up on the patrol course, and each and every one of you took in turn in being a patrol commander. You ran the patrol, how you ran it, and it was just how you would run a patrol and how you participated within that patrol, and the directing staff followed the patrol around as part. They weren't part of the patrol, but they were there assessing you. And when I say assessing you, it wasn't from afar, it was there, they were with you, and they watched you the whole time.
Did you have any, how did you find the challenges during those patrols?
Oh, that was good, yeah. I mean, it's a learning curve. I mean, you made mistakes, and you expected to make mistakes, but as long as you didn't make too many. But, I mean, everybody made the mistake, and I mean, it's good to make the mistakes there on exercises and achieve, I mean, you were given objectives and, as though it was a real patrol. When I say a real patrol, it was a real patrol, if you like. I think you do it in Australia. But you were expected to perform at a level that was, the highest level.
Tell me about your trip to New Guinea.
We spent a couple of months up there in New Guinea. It was sort of like a lead-up exercise, like after all this 12-month period, and then New Guinea was like an exercise in a hostile environment, basically, where you had to survive in that environment on a normal patrol basis. And 2 months up there, we had a couple of, like a shakedown thing where we had to get from point A to point B over a very mountainous terrain. And the idea was, the incentive was, you had 10 days to do it. And if you could do it in less, well, you got those days off. So I think we ended up doing it in 8 days, but it was pretty, I mean, I don't know, if you get in the mountains in New Guinea, you know that you're in, well, they border mountain, I suppose, but it's mountainous country, and I mean, you go straight up all day and get to the top, and there might be a village up there, and then you come down all the next day. I mean, it's just, that's how steep and it is, and it's just really physically taxing. And you get to learn to interact with the locals, because the idea is that we had, our second task was just to see what was going on out there, because as you can imagine, it's fairly remote, so consequently there's not a lot of law and order. And on this 10-day patrol, they asked us if we'd take a local policeman with us, which was a local bloke, Papua New Guinea fella. So yeah, he came along with us, and he was basically a show the flag exercise for them, because they wouldn't normally get out that way. So you're in a fairly remote country, and the idea is to interact with the locals. And I, as a medic, treated, a few of the injuries and sort, and you'd put things. I mean, it was a bit hard because a lot of them had tropical ulcers and things like that. So you'd dress them and leave a note with them for the next patrol. If there was another patrol, you'd know another patrol might be through in a couple of days. So you'd just leave a note saying, "Oh, change the dressing," or do this, do that. So that sort of thing. But the problem was that you'd do that, and the kid might be away the day that the other patrol came through. So, but we did our best, and you'd sort of hearts and minds, basically. Fix them up if you can, cuts, bruises, anything like that. But you couldn't do anything too major because you weren't there long enough. But so that sort of thing happened, and over that period of time. And so then you got back to the end, the finish line, if you like, and had in our case, we had 2 days off.
How long were you marching for?
8 days. But that was, 8 days seemed like 100.
What kind of atmosphere did that create?
Oh, for us, it was good. I mean, it was just one of history, basically. And you sort of, because you'd had a father that had worked in that country in the Second World War, but also the locals were very keen to tell you, especially the older fellas, what happened in their area with the Japanese. They were very keen to sort of say how they performed. It was all in pidgin English, of course, but they used to tell us what the Japanese did and how they performed and what went on. And you'd go into you'd sort of struggle up the hill, and you'd get into a village, and they'd welcome you with open arms, the villagers, and they'd offer you food, and mainly it was sweet potato and bloody cucumber.
How long had you been back from New Guinea before you were ready to go to Vietnam?
We came back November, December, about 3 months.
So in that time we discussed earlier, you met your future wife.
Yeah, exactly. It was on leave, future wife. Generally tidying up. We had a leave period. Went back from leave, and then you were just preparing. Like you had to. There was things to do. You had to get gear ready. Because our gear was inadequate, we got our own made. I got some gear made. I don't know if he's still there. Old Rolly Tasker. It used to be a yachting shop. I think he's still around. I got a lot of gear made there, like pouches for ammunition and all that sort of stuff, because they were sail makers, see? And we got our own stuff. We could do that in SAS, but in an infantry battalion you had to wear what you were issued and all that sort of stuff.
When you say the stuff that you issued was no good, what was wrong with it?
Well, it just wasn't adequate for what our type of role, I mean, you had to carry, if you had to carry, say, 10 magazines for your rifle, well, the equipment that's issued to you doesn't do that, So the idea is you get pouches made up that's going to do that, and there was bits and pieces that you might find that were good. You just needed little bits and pieces to make life a little bit easier. Like I was a patrol medic, so I wanted a pouch adequately on my belt that would take an emergency medical kit. So I got one made up because you never got issued one. So I'd have an emergency medical kit on my belt that never left me, and I'd have others that was in my pack that you could stop and open and use. Whereas if you're in the shit, you had the emergency medical kit. So I got a pouch made up for that. So that was safe, and all that type of stuff. Whereas that wasn't issued.
What medical supplies were you issued with?
Oh well, all the drugs that I mentioned before. You had painkillers. We had general bandages, disinfectants, all that sort of stuff that you're going to need for cuts, bruises, bee stings, snake bites, all that sort of stuff. Everything to treat those. As I say, there was a lot of anything, painkillers, syringes, all that type of Well, it's basically enough medical supplies to sustain a small force in a remote area. And I don't think, things like thermometers and all that sort of stuff, there wasn't any, there was no sort of giving sets for putting up IVs and things like that. We didn't do any of that. Not at that point, because I mean, also what you got to take into account too was, I mean, they could get somebody out of the scrub in Vietnam quicker than they could pick them up in an ambulance in Perth. That's if they wanted to, especially if the helicopters were available. I mean, that was part of the deal. You called them in, whatever. Sometimes it'd take longer. It depended on what was going on at the time or what sort of activity was around. So consequently, the idea was just to make person comfortable, stop it, get them in a position where you're going to try and save their life, but you get them out on a medevac helicopter fairly quickly. So even though you were trained to sustain that small force for prolonged periods, if somebody was wounded or what, in Vietnam that the necessity wasn't there to maintain them a long time because of the air support. And that air support was unchallenged in Vietnam because the other side never had any aircraft, especially where we were operating. So consequently, even though, as I say, you were trained to maintain that, there was no need to there.
Oh, okay. So that's a loud earth mover of some description.
Oh, there's the highway there. It might be the road train coming down. Come on, Jim, don't come in here. Was there something banging? I've heard a rock breaker or something right over the back there.
Yeah.
I think it's going bang, 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 bang.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might have heard it through that. I couldn't hear it here. But the other day, I walked up there and I heard it. I thought something was blown up.
So landing in Vietnam, what happened?
It was very daunting, actually. You sort of, well, the first thing I can remember is sort of as we're flying over Vietnam, you can sort of look out of the aircraft and you're sort of coming in and you can see outlying areas where there'd been bomb craters and stuff. And sort of looking out the window, and then a couple of phantom jets appear on the wings, and they sort of actually got the escort. So that's sort of fairly daunting. Yeah, well, it's just different basically, and then you land at Ton Son Nhut Airport, and I mean Ton Son Nhut at that stage was reputed to be the busiest airport in the world because of all the military activity, both civilian and military. Was being used, but I mean the military hardware and aircraft of all shapes and sizes there was just unbelievable. As somebody coming from Australia, that's we're sort of fairly conservative with our forces. You go on there and there's every known shape of aircraft and military vehicle around the place, and it's just packed. You don't realise there's that many in the world, and that's just at that Ton Son Nhut. So that was sort of an eye-opener when you get there, and we had to sit around and wait for an aircraft to take us from Saigon up to Nui Dat where we were. So that was just a matter of the same old story in the military. It was sort of hurry up and wait and sit around and wait. And that's what all we did was wait. But the 3 squadron guys, most of them were on the way out, so they were sort of there at the airport. They were hopping on the Qantas flight to go back to Perth. So you sort of had a bit of a change out, a bit of a chat, what's the go, Nothing, very military, I suppose, just how they'd, I mean, it wasn't long enough to get into any deep, meaningful discussions, but they were going back and we were taking over, and that was that.
So how did you actually get to Nui Dat?
They put us on a Hercules aircraft, or American Hercules, and that was my first experience of the American system of safety.
And what was that?
Oh, well, I mean, when you're used to flying around an aircraft in Australia in and Caribous and things and helicopters, I mean, the safety and the conduct of the crew is above reproach. They right on the ball, they do what they do, and they do it well. And I mean, you get on the aircraft, the Americans, and they're pretty laid back, if you like to put it kindly. I mean, yeah, they sort of given you a bit of a talk about the safety aspects of the plane, and I mean, it was just they weren't that interested really. Yeah, and I mean, if we crash and you need to get out of the plane, just follow the crew out. You know, that was their attitude. Yeah. But I mean, I just thought there it was a bit slack, and I mean, I remember it quite well because of that. And I mean, it's just that you're used to coming from a more disciplined thing.
What were your first impressions?
Oh, well, I mean, you'd seen photos and that, so it was basically, you know, you were allocated to your tent and that was that. But as I say, I'd seen photos of the place, and your first impressions are of one of, oh yeah, I remember this sort of thing. And you just settle in, basically. And that was like day one. That was in the afternoon, if I remember rightly, because we left. Yeah, by the time we'd flown up there, it was sort of next day, you know, because we flew during the night. Yeah, so it was just a matter of, here's your thing, make yourself comfortable. And that's what you did. You know, there was no comforts of home as such. I mean, a lot of the stuff, furniture and that had been made by the previous occupants and the ones before them, so it was just added to, and you know, you just had your bed and your locker, and you know, in our place I think we had a table and a couple of chairs and all that. So whatever you wanted to make yourself comfortable, you made it, you know, or knocked it off from somewhere else. So that's how it worked. So that's what it was. We just sort of settled in, and then that was it. Went up the Boozer that night.
What was the Boozer like up there?
Well, when we were there, it was just an open area, just a concrete open area, just with a few lounge, sort of like cane lounge type things around the place. You know, it wasn't anything too flash. It was just somewhere to drink. Sort of central point, I suppose. But yeah, we had that.
Were you welcomed by other SAS?
Oh yeah, well, just the guys that were left. There was a few blokes that were still there. Obviously, they have an advance party, and then there's a rear party as well. And I mean, they just tidying up their last bits of things. But they're in the main, that most of the squadron we'd seen at the airport in Saigon, so they'd already gone. So basically, you were just there with the same blokes that you flew up there with, and there was the odd one or two blokes around the place from the squadron that had left, and there was a bit of a handover of some of the positions, you know, that didn't involve me, sort of thing. And basically, then you sort of have a bit of an orientation around the place, you know, find your way around. You know, showing you where, you know, weapon pits and things like that, you know, because there is times when you have to, what they call stand to, which something might happen at the task force base, and you've got weapon pits and all that sort of thing at the main bases, and you've got to man those. And we had a gun pit, and yeah, that was manned all the time. And those are the sort of things you've got to orientate yourself to where they are for a start. And if there's a stand to, which pit do you go to? Because obviously that's all got to be worked out. You don't want everyone turning up at the same spot. Yeah, which is, and also you've got your own personal sort of shelters, if you like, outside your tent. You make sure they're in working order, and there's no snakes and that taking up residence in them, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so there was all that to be done. So it was quite sort of busy time, I guess, because also what you got to came into play was your acclimatisation to the climate, because you'd flown out of Perth in February, which is the summer dry heat time, and we flew up there, and it was the dry season up there at the time in February. So I guess for us coming from WA, it wasn't too bad, but it's still a tropical type heat. So your acclimatisation has got to start. So you're in an environment that you're comfortable in, you're acclimatised. So, I mean, there's forms that takes. We used to have, we started off sort of walking around the area as a troop, because you're all doing your own thing in troop lots. And, we'd start off walking around, then you'd jog the next day and and that's how, you get used to the place and all that sort of stuff. So they generally reckon that, I don't know what the scientists say nowadays, but in those days they reckon you should be acclimatised or fairly well acclimatised in 2 weeks, which probably makes sense, if you do it right. It means that you can stay there and do things you would normally do anywhere else without dehydrating and all that sort of stuff. So that all had to be done too. So there was no patrols or anything until such times as all that took place. There was a bit of orientation with where you went to on patrols, as far as briefing huts, when you do all that sort of stuff with the Air Force. So you had to know where all that stuff was. It probably wasn't as important because people knew where it was anyway, to a certain extent. But I mean, all that sort of stuff. You just sort of knowing your way around. You just got to get used to your surroundings. Who's where, who's camped over there. Because we were actually up on a hill, the SAS Hill it was called, and straight across from us was where 7 Battalion was. Across the airfield, there was an airfield down the bottom of the hill and then a battalion area. So we were sort of looking, they were in a rubber plantation across. And then there was units dotted all around us. There was an American artillery outfit on the hill somewhere just above us, because we used to hear them firing all night.
What were they firing at?
Oh, what used to happen is they had a system over there which they called H&I, which is harassment and interdiction. And what they'd do is they had these howitzers that I reckon they fired halfway around the world, but they used to fire them. They'd just get an area and just fire into it at all hours of the day and night. And I mean, it was called, so what it was that if they had some intelligence to say that there could be something in that area or whatever, they'd just fire into it. Make sure that there was no goodies or supposed to be in it, and then they'd just fire. They'd fire, and that could be happening all days, all times of the day, and at night. So you'd be sleeping, and then they'd fire over the top of you.
It sounds pretty harassing from your point of view.
Well, it sort of used to wake you up with a bit of a start, but I mean, you just got used to that stuff after a while, and that went on all the time. H&I, as that was called. And I mean, you never knew what was out there, but I mean, neither did the local enemy. They didn't know if they were going to be sort of, and then all of a sudden something lobs in on top of them. So that's what it was for: harassment and interdiction. Or they'd get fire missions. You might have a company out there that was in the shit. They'd call in artillery. They'd fire into the area. So there was all that sort of stuff going on all the time. There was another couple of guns down the bottom of the hill, because we used to sit up and watch them fire. And they had the big howitzers they'd fire, and the barrel would spring back, and you'd hear the thing going, and you hear it going and going, and that's what I reckon the thing is to fire halfway around the world. I don't know what their range was, about 12 miles or something, I don't know, but they used to take off. But so that was sort of going on all the time.
So what was the briefing setup like on the hill if you were going out to a patrol?
Well, see, what used to happen is you'd get a warning order for a start. That'd be a couple of days beforehand, and the warning order would say that you're required to take, the patrol commander would get it required to take a patrol out to a certain area to do such, whatever the task may be, reconnaissance or whatever, which in the main that's what you're there to do. And so basically you'd make preparation. I, as the medic, would make sure the medical kit was up to standard, etc., etc. If I needed to have other members of the patrol carry certain parts of the medical kit, all that used to happen. My medical kit, especially the painkillers like Fortral and morphine, were broken up amongst the patrol. So each and every, or at least 3 others beside myself had a syringe and ampules of Fortral or whatever they were in their pockets. I used to ask them to carry them in their top pocket, so everybody knew where they were. So those sorts of things are significant in your training. It's not much point in saying, well, here, have this, and he puts it in a pocket that you'll never find. So you got to carry it in your top left-hand pocket. So those sort of things are significant. So you know what's going on. Everybody knows. And so that's the sort of thing I used to do. The 2IC of the patrol would make sure all the ammunition and grenades and any special weapons that we needed to take was collected and distributed. The patrol commander would do his patrol orders, and maybe him and one other of the patrol would go and reconnoitre the area from the air, just to have a look, see what might be out there. And obviously you'd have to be fairly careful doing that, because you didn't want to alert anybody to the fact that you might turn up there in a couple of days' time. So there was that sort of stuff, and all that was going on. The SIG guy, the bloke running the SIGs, the communications, make sure all his gear was there and tested and working. And so that'd take place over a couple of days. You'd go down to the intelligence officer and he'd brief you on what was known in the area, what other major units you might, enemy forces that you may encounter.
That'll be the phone. We'll just pause for a second.
Just let it.
How easy or difficult was it to get restocked with supplies, like particularly for the medical side of things?
Oh, there was no difficulty. You got what you needed, especially because we took a lot of stuff. We took all our stuff with us, but if we needed anything, we went to the medic. We had a squadron medic, and he'd get it up for us, or they'd scrounge around and get it from somewhere. Because the Americans had a heap of stuff. You could always get stuff off them. So there was no shortage of that. I never encountered that anyway. We always had what we needed to take with us. On the weapon side of thing, it was the same thing. I didn't see there was any shortages or that affected me that I can remember at the time we were there. I couldn't see anything.
How about the rations? What were they like?
We had American rations because, unlike the infantry battalions, they had a lot of Australian rations, but we had the American long-range patrol rations, which were all dehydrated, and you just added water, because obviously they were lighter, and they were quite good actually. They were better than the Australian rations, put it that way. The Australian dehydrated rations, some were good, some weren't so bad, but there wasn't a lot of them. The Australian ration packs were made up 24-hour ration pack, which a lot of the battalions had, were cans of stuff, tins of stuff, which, it's just, if you're trying to go on a long-range patrol, that's the last thing you want to be doing is carting tins around with you, because you've got to dispose of them. And the only way you can dispose of them safely in our job is carry them around with you. You can't actually bury them, because, it might be all right and you might be able to camouflage it to you or somebody else, but you can't to a hungry animal, and they dig them up, So consequently, you've got a couple of cans or tins out in the bush. They've got to come from somewhere, and they certainly didn't come from the local VC or the North Vietnamese Army. They had to come from an Australian patrol of some description. So you got to, those sort of things you had to be aware of. especially in our situation because we only had very few guys. There was only 5 of us. So all those things had to be taken into account, and you didn't really want to be carting that stuff around with you. I mean, you just have the dehydrated stuff, and I mean, you'd get a ration pack and you'd break it down, and the idea was is you break it up into meals. So then you'd have, I got this meal, this meal, this meal, and I always used to carry an emergency ration, which were just in a tin basically. They were like in a sardine tin that you pull and it was just an emergency. There was a bar of chocolate and something else in it, I can't remember. But it was just to sustain you for 24 hours. But you carry that, but I always carried 1 day's ration on my belt anyway, and that's what I was saying before about getting equipment designed to carry what you needed to carry, you know. In a battalion you didn't need to do that, you know. But what we did, we had to. Well, you didn't have to, but it was all, everything was done in case of. So I mean, when you're out, you've got to try and every contingency if you can, and that was one.
What was your favourite dried food?
I don't know. Spaghetti and meatballs wasn't too bad. I can remember that. But see, the problem was is that you get all the good stuff, and you'd have it eaten before you went to the bush, because you go up the boozer and get on the booze, and then you want a late night snack. So you're not going to eat crap. So all the good stuff used to get eaten, and you'd have to try and purloin stuff, you know, for your late night snacks. So yeah, you'd purloin rations of some description, but they used to have lurk parties, as they called them, and yeah, you'd have your rations, and yeah, and that
Lurk parties.
yeah, long range patrol. Yeah, that's what lurpies. You know, that's what they were called. Yeah, you'd sort of have a late night snack, as one does, because there was no sort of hamburger shop or anything nearby. You just had to make do. And once the kitchen closed for after tea, that was it. There was no, unless you had your own stuff that you might have bought from the PX or somewhere, like biscuits or stuff. Well, that's what you had, was rations. So the idea was is that if you got a few around, you'd save them up and for those occasions. But yeah, there was all different ones. Chili con carne, I can remember, that wasn't too bad. But I can't really remember anymore. There was all different ones, but I know the spaghetti and meatballs used to be quite popular actually, so it must have been all right.
How about the food in the mess? What was that like?
The cooks did the best they could with what they had. I mean, like eggs were etherised. You had etherised eggs. I couldn't get over it. They used to either, I don't know how they did it, but they either soaked them in ether or injected them with ether to keep them from going off. So then you'd have this egg that was etherised eggs, and you could taste it, even though you could taste the egg was there, and the yolks never used to get, they was always yellow. You know how you cook an egg and it sort of goes white or something? These never used to do that. They'd go yellow. Well, they'd stay yellow. So they'd look raw, even though they were cooked. But they were etherised, and the reason, as I say, they're etherised is to keep them from going off. Because by the time they were got up there, shipped up there and all that sort of stuff. And same with they'd have scrambled eggs, and which were etherised. But that was the one thing that stuck in my mind, was the etherised eggs. But everything else was like, I mean, it was food. And I mean, you used to have choc milk, and that, which was American choc milk, and it was so thick and sweet that I used to always water it down, not water, but other milk, So I used to like choc milk, but not that thick and sweet. But yeah, there was American stuff like that. But the cooks did a good job in a fairly difficult situation, I guess.
Would you get fresh meat at any point?
Yeah, there was, I can't remember now, there was sort of meat in that, but I guess, I don't know how they whether they froze it or what, but I used to like going down to 9 Squadron, they were the helicopters, because they used to get their stuff flown up from, because being an Air Force, they used to have it flown up from Malaysia, their base in Butterworth, and it was all fresh. Yeah, so it was a bit of a treat going there, and you'd always make sure you had breakfast when you went there, so you didn't have to eat authorised eggs. Yeah, so...
so what, you get an invitation by these blokes?
That was a bit of a thing with 9 Squadron. We had a very good relationship with 9 Squadron. That was the helicopters and the bush rangers. They were the gunships. And we got on really well with them. And what used to happen is when we'd come back off a patrol, you get cleaned up and all that sort of thing. And if there was a helicopter going back to their base in Vung Tau that night, depending on when, by the time you got squared away, they'd take us down there, and we'd spend the night at their base in Vung Tau, and you'd go out into Vung Tau or whatever just for the night, and then get up in the morning, have breakfast, and then fly back. So it was sort of like a wind down thing, or if you couldn't get that night, you'd go the next night. But it was always sort of one night you'd end up going down there soon after coming back from a patrol. So, and that relationship fostered all through the whole time, because they did some pretty good stuff. They pulled us out, not me personally, but other patrols out of some pretty hairy situations. And there was no thought for their own safety. It was just to get the troops out, hot extractions and being fired at whilst that's happening. And so they did some pretty good stuff, and that's why the relationship built up, because they would come and get you if you're in the shit, and you knew that. You knew if they couldn't come and get you, nobody could. And that's how it was,
Was that a traditional relationship between 9 Squadron and SAS?
Well, it's still going on now. Down at the SAS Association, we have members of the 9 Squadron that were part of they were the door gunners and the mechanics and pilots and all that. They're part of the association as affiliate members, some of them. They've now formed their own. But that relationship was a traditional type relationship. As the squadrons turned over. When we went to New Guinea, the guys that were actually going to take over in 9 Squadron in Vietnam were in New Guinea with us. They flew the helicopters and they were the door gunners in New Guinea. So you actually formed those relationships in New Guinea. You got to know the guys, who they were, who the door gunners were, and all that sort of stuff. And it was just unwritten laws, like if they're winching you out, and the first guy up always takes over, from our side, if they're pulling you out of a sticky situation. The idea was that the first guy up into the helicopter took the gun over, their machine gun, while their bloke worked the winch to get the rest of them out, and you used their gun. All that sort of stuff used to happen, whereas they wouldn't. I don't think that relationship existed with the battalion people. We had that relationship with them, and they trusted us enough to be firing their machine guns out of their helicopters. So, and that was how it went. And it was a good relationship. And as I say, if they couldn't come and get you, nobody could. And when they put you in, they used to make sure that you were okay before they left the area. When I say left the area, they'd be off, and you wouldn't hear the helicopters, but they were around, and you were in radio contact. And if they said they were going to be waiting around for 20 minutes whilst you started off your patrol, well, they were, they weren't going to bugger off it and leave you, in case when you went in, you ran into some angry people.
So what was Vung Tau like?
I guess Vung Tau was just like an Asian city, but a poor one. It was a bit of an eye opener, because it was sort of stuff that you see on movies. There was heaps of people walking around in uniform. Australians never went to town in uniform. Americans did. There was all sorts of things. There was bloody military vehicles around all over the place, bars, bar girls, just that type of environment. Thrown into the mix, a lot of little kids running around begging, people selling rolls and hand hot dogs and stuff in vending carts on the streets, and it was all that sort of stuff all going on. There was a curfew, if I remember rightly. You had to be off the street by midnight, and that was just part of the deal. But Vung Tau was just, it was just one of those towns that you could imagine. You see these American movies of the Vietnam days, and that's where they have all these bar girls dancing around the place and all that. Well, that's how it was, and they've had all these little kids running around begging. And I remember being down there, and a mate of mine, we were walking along, and he'd bought a watch, and he had the box of the watch. I don't know where he bought it, but anyway, and the box was. It was just a box, and this little kid followed us around to get that box. He wanted the box. It was like a treasure, but I don't know why. He was only 7 or 8, but so any little thing like that was a treasure. Now, what he had in mind for it, I don't know, but when you're that poor that an empty cardboard box is fairly significant to your way of life. So so there was the kids and the mums with their little babies, and the dads were all around the place. But so Vungers was just, there was, the cultural things, like it's a coastal town that was supposedly very affluent in its day. I'd like to think that it'll go back that way. There was a lot of French architecture, because the French had been there for a long time beforehand. I think there was a lot of French people still living there, not that I had any contact with them. Because of those days, there were rubber plants, they just happened to be in a country that was at war. And if the Americans hadn't been there, there was would have been a civil war. So they had that French influence in Vung Tau, but it never sort of came to me at all.
Would you hang out a lot at the Peter Badco Club?
No, not really. We didn't. I remember going down there, being attached down there, me and another guy who I still see today. He lives in Melbourne. We were attached down there because SAS is supposed to be small craft handlers, and they had boats and yachts and that for the troops to use. So they used to send a couple of SAS guys down there to help them out, It was just a 2-week bludge, basically. We went down there and I think we had to go out and get somebody who'd gone too far out in each little hire yacht. So we went out and picked him up with the speedboat and that sort of stuff. So you'd sort of help out and hire the boats out, because they had, it was like I suppose you could equate it to a surf club, and they used to hire out boats and like yachts, or I don't think the power boats, I just can't remember what they had. I know they had yachts, but I think there was like kayaks and things like that, but there was nothing that you couldn't, it was that very difficult. And we went down there and I thought, well, why not? You want me to come down there? I'll come down there. Yeah, so we were there for that time, and that's why we knew the restaurant, the little restaurant was there. It was like it was just like a mess hall, but they used to give you a menu, and on the menu was only about three dishes, so it just felt as though you were in a restaurant. But no, we didn't hang out much there. That was the only time I think, I might have went there a couple other times, I can't remember, but nothing significant to me to go there.
Were the bars pretty popular in Vung Tau?
Yes, very popular. from what I can gather. No. Though, well, they were. It's an outlet for the blokes. I mean, there was bar girls there that used to always want you to be buying drinks, Saigon tea or whatever, which was just watered down cold tea that's supposed to be whiskey, I suppose, and cost you $1 million. But that's, it's the same bar girls all over the world, They, you pay $1 million for a drink and they get a cut out of it, and it's the cheapest drink in the house, basically. But they were popular, and for reasons of all sorts, there was guys there that just wanted to go in there and talk to the bar girls. There was guys there that wanted to just go and get pissed. Guys there that wanted some form of relationship with these young ladies. I mean, some guys sort of fell in love. But, I mean, and then wondered why these, then were surprised that they were going out with every other Tom, Dick and Harry. But, so there was all sort of recreational pursuits, I guess, and that was one of them. And the bars were very popular. But, I mean, you had to be careful at the same time, because it was a fairly lawless era in that country. I mean, the coppers up there, which were known as the white mice, they weren't, they weren't phased about shooting you. That didn't enter into their mind. If you were doing something and they pulled out their gun and you continued to do it, they'd just shoot you. And that's how it was, So when you got a police force supposedly like that, the rest of the country is pretty lawless. So you just had to be careful. Even though you could have a good time at the bars, you just had to keep your wits about you. And that's how I looked at it anyway.
Speaking of having a good time at the bars, what about venereal diseases?
Well, obviously that was prevalent, but obviously you get the same old military lectures about what you should do and what you shouldn't do. There was nobody that I knew in our squadron that got a dose that I can remember. I can't. So obviously they were pretty careful, or they abstained, one of the two. But I can't remember anybody getting a dose. But there was, it was known that that's venereal disease was sort of rife. So you had to be. That was another thing.
What was the Army's view upon venereal disease?
Oh, they didn't. Well, there didn't appear to be any view. I mean, the thing is that it was an imposition to whoever it was, because the thing is that whilst you got venereal disease and you're being treated, you can't operate. If you go to hospital or you're being treated with penicillin or.
How were the patrols organised out in the bush?
The patrols, obviously the preparation and lead up to going there, you had all that organised, if you like. Like you had a 5-man patrol, and then you had like a scout and a patrol commander, and then the rest of the patrol, 5, so in single file, 5 years. Generally, you got to maintain sight of the person in front of you at all times. Depending on what sort of country you're travelling through, as to how far apart you'd be.
Do you want to start with how you were briefed before a patrol and the sort of preparation you'd do?
Yeah, well, see, what had happened is you get a warning order, as I said before, and you'd get all your gear ready. Me as a medic, I'd get all that stuff ready. The briefing would take place by the intelligence officer. He'd let you know what was happening in the area, who was there, what wasn't there, what friendly forces were maybe in the area, what known enemy activity was in the area. Then he'd reinforce what our task was to be, whether it was to go out there and sit on a track, what was reported to be a well-used track or something like that, and just see who walks by and in which direction they're going, what they're carrying, how they're dressed, all that sort of stuff. Once that was done, we would then go away, we'd get ready for the patrol, and then we would go down to the helicopter pad and we'd all be in there, the 5 patrol members plus all the pilots, all the door gunners of the Air Force, and they would do a briefing as well. So because they'd brief their pilots as to where they were going, what the LZ was, which is the landing zone, what were the alternate landing zones, what they would do if an aircraft was shot down, who was in command, if the aircraft was shot down, how that would work. And generally, if an aircraft was shot down, the patrol commander was in charge of everybody. That includes the pilots, and they took their orders from the patrol commander because he was on the ground. If anything happened in the air, obviously it's the pilot is in charge. So that's how it worked. So you do that briefing with them, and then you'd go out, hop on the helicopters, and off you'd go. Now that was one of the most harrowing points of the time, because you would approach the landing zone a couple of, a distance out from the landing zone. The helicopters would drop down at treetop level, and they'd be flying over the top of the treetops, and you'd just be skimming them. And then all of a sudden, where the landing zone was, which is normally a clearing or something, they'd just drop down. And the idea was as the patrol would get off. But as the helicopter was coming in, hovering in, the helicopter wouldn't land. Now, the quickest you could get off was obviously the best. So you'd be jumping off the helicopter like the first man out, which was always the scout. You always jumped out in patrol order. So there was no shuffling or anything. Just off you went. I mean, he might jump out of the helicopter, say, from the bottom of the light, and then by the time everybody was out, the helicopter wouldn't have even come anywhere near the ground, and they'd take off. Sometimes if you miscued it, they'd touch and go sort of thing. But then once you're out, what you did was just ran into the bush, or whatever it was, jungle or whatever, and that was the most harrowing time because you didn't know what was in there. I mean, you could be running into anything. So therefore, it was sort of quite nerve-wracking. And I always say to we used to carry our own water, obviously, but I used to have water bottles, and I used to always have a bladder of water down in the front of my shirt with a plastic tube on it. And that was another thing we designed ourselves, obviously. But that whole bladder, which was probably about 4 to 6 litres, I think, I'm not sure. It's about that big, I suppose. Yeah, probably about 4 to 6 litres of water. That would be all gone by the time we'd be down and on the ground and start patrolling, because you're so dry because of the adrenaline and this perspiration coming off you, that you're drinking this water the whole time. So I would suggest we'd go in the afternoon in most cases, and by the time you'd pull up that night, you would have drank that water so that it'd be gone. So you'd know that bag of water was going to be gone in the first hour to 2 hours of the patrol.
How much water did you carry with you into patrol?
Well, in the dry season you carried quite a bit. I used to, bearing in mind that 1 litre of water is a kilo, I used to carry a bladder of water of about 4 litres in my pack, and then I used to carry 5 water bottles, I think. They were about 1 litre to 2 litres in each water bottle, I can't remember. So you're probably looking at about 12, 13 litres of water, and then hope for resupply out there, either out of a creek or if there was any note, because you'd obviously have a map of the area that you're going into, and you'd organise your patrol that maybe you'd cross that creek on day 4 or day 3 and hope there's water in it, because in the wet season it was okay because there was plenty of water around. In the dry season, there's not a lot of water. And one patrol we did, we had to actually get resupplied with water, and resupply of an SAS patrol is not a good thing because people know you're there. And what it was actually Easter time, as I remember, and they dropped bladders of water down. They were round, like air socks, wind socks thing. I guess similar, but just one diameter of rubber, and they used to fill them up with water, and they just drop them out of the helicopter to the ground, and they wouldn't break, supposedly. And then you just have a little nozzle and you'd fill up your water bottles with them. The idea was that they'd come over, drop them down to you, you go and pick them up, take it and get out of the area as quick as you can, and then fill the water bottles up. But I remember the resupply we had, they dropped down 2 bladders of water, but one got caught up in a tree and we couldn't get it. So it's probably still there today. But that was a bit of pain because you think you're going to have plenty of water, and other sort of contingencies you've got to plan for. You can't guzzle, you think, oh, we're getting a resupply today, you just get stuck into the water. Because if you did that, and then that happened, which it did, you're behind the 8 ball. You've drank a lot of the water that you should have been saving. Yeah. So, and resupplying an SAS patrol, I don't think was a very good thing, because it can compromise you when you don't want anybody knowing you're there.
What would happen when you cleared the landing zone on a patrol?
Well, you just patrol off in a direction a predetermined direction, and you'd be out, just do that, patrolling, looking in the area, or if you're making for a point where it might have been a T-junction of a track that was supposedly there, or whatever, you'd reach the objective. But if you were just there patrolling in the area to find out what was there, well, that's what you'd do. You would patrol all day and then stop at night, get up in the morning, do the same thing again the next day, taking notes or memorising what was in the area. If there was nothing there, well, there was nothing to report. But each day, twice a day, you'd have scheduled times that you would call back to the camp and tell them where you were, what you were doing, had you seen anything, any intelligence to pass on. And those sced times, as we called them, were done at particular times of the day, because the reason that was is because if in the morning you missed a sced time, and if you didn't come up on the second sced time, they'd be out there looking for you, because that was one way of knowing that the patrol may be in trouble if they're not keeping to their sced times, and you had to. I mean, if you missed the sced at, say it was 10 o'clock, your sced time in the morning, and you did it at 12, well, it was no worries. But you'd have to have a pretty good reason that you're doing it at 12, and you would have, because you wouldn't miss your sced time. So those sorts of things you had on a day-to-day basis as you patrolled. And as I say, you just memorised, kept notes of what you'd seen. You might come across an old bunker system or a fresh bunker system. See what's there, what's in it. You might come across a well-used track that they didn't know was there. You might sit on it for a day, see a well-used track and think, oh, so you just plonk, and obviously come back and observe it. You might decide to observe it for 2 days. I mean, and that just means sitting in the one spot for 2 days. And so that's how the patrols were conducted, as a reconnaissance patrol, and that was the main aim of the whole thing.
What happened on your first patrol?
No, not a lot. Yeah, I mean, the area we went into, I think, you can sort of remember bits of it, but there was nothing untoward happen. It was just one of those things. I think we came across an old bunker system. I'm pretty sure, I remember going into an old bunker system and there was turtle shells and all this sort of stuff. And I said, we were sort of talking about it later, and one of the guys said, you know, their propaganda people must be really good, you know. I mean, talking these people into living in these holes in the ground, living off bloody turtles, and saying you're fighting for a good cause. I mean, you know, I mean, there's plenty of room for doubt, isn't there? I mean, so whoever their cadre officers or whatever they were, saying, you know, that you fight the good fight and this is what's going to happen, we're all going to go to the promised land or whatever, I don't know. But they had to be pretty good to persuade the people to continue doing that, you know.
Did you come across many bunker systems?
No. I can only remember sort of two. One was sort of fairly fresh and one was old. But I mean, they were there for reasons. I guess the reasons were that they used to stop. I mean, they had people transiting all over the province, and they needed places to stay. You know, it's just like a hotel, I guess. And they'd stop off there, and they needed somewhere for their own protection. So you had to be a bit careful, you know, like you didn't want to go stumbling in there in case there was anybody in there for a start. And also they could have been booby-trapped and all that sort of stuff. So you had to be step pretty carefully, you know, for mines and things like that. So you know, unless you had, I mean, they weren't that good a places to be around, you know, in case all this stuff was there for health reasons. But, I mean, obviously that's what you had to do. You had to go and check them out, see what was there. You know, they might have left behind things that would give you any form of intelligence. But other than that, they're probably not the best place to be around, because whilst you're sneaking around in there, they might turn up. I mean, so, well, you're compromised, your patrol's compromised, you know. Yeah.
How did you spend evenings in the bush?
Quietly. I mean, well, there's not a lot you do. You know, like at night, you'd pull up during the night, and what we used to do is we'd pull up, and in some cases it depends what it was. You'd pull up at night, or in the afternoon. You'd make your evening meal, if you like, get that squared away, have that. And then some patrols would move on to another location to stay the night, or you'd stay the night there, dependent on what, you know. I mean, the only thing why you do that is so if anyone sprung you in that, could smell the cooking smells or whatever, you could move out of the area, and you know, you might patrol for another half hour or something, just, and then go into an area where look for a good place to sleep for the night, you know. And the idea, you know, we didn't used to do anything too outlandish. We just clear a little area for ourselves, make sure you're not going to be rattling sticks and that during the night, because there's nothing worse than waking up hearing that, you know. And we're just in a circle. I used to just have a bit of plastic, soft plastic, and you'd sort of lay on that and put it over the top of you, because that was the best thing to keep your body warmth in. And you just lay there in arm's length of one another, because if you heard anything during the night, or somebody was snoring or anything, you'd wake them up, stop them from snoring. So you could reach either side of you, so you're within arm's reach of the whole patrol. And you'd just lay there overnight. I used to eat a bit of chocolate. You'd have your ration-packed chocolate, drink of water, just look up at the stars, and that's it. You couldn't smoke or talk or anything like that. Just you're with your own thoughts, basically. And you just lay there and then go to sleep. And then you'd obviously, you're not, it's a fitful sleep, I guess. It's not one of comfort, because you're sort of basically sleeping with, I think one of the blokes wrote a book about the SAS called Sleeping with Your Ears Open, and that sort of sums it up. You know.
How long were the patrols generally?
Well, generally the patrols that we did were 5 to 6 days. I know some of the squadrons did 14-day patrols, and sometimes you do 10, but in the main they were between 5 and 6 days. They give you an area to look at, and they reckon that you could just about traverse that area and see what was in that area in 5 or 6 days.
Is it difficult to maintain that discipline over that time?
No, not really. I mean, that's what you're trained for, and anything is not hard to maintain when you know if you slip up you're going to die. So there's a bit of incentive there to maintain that discipline. And also, if you weren't maintaining it, your offsiders would tell you, because it was there. You know, it was one in all in. I mean, you didn't want any, and that was what the training was all about. You know, prior to that, I mean, even though you did your selection course and all the other courses, you're still being sort of assessed by your own patrol members all the time, because they didn't want any, because your life depended on it. And if somebody was doing something that really wasn't conducive to maintaining patrol security, you were told about it, in no uncertain terms in some cases, but that's how it was.
What kind of relationships did you have with your patrol members?
Oh, good. I still got them today. I see them occasionally. I see one of the guys lives down in Falcon. I see him often, once a fortnight at least. I go and stay with one guy in Melbourne. I'm going actually at the end of this month. And another guy I see a couple of times a year, the patrol commander. So those, we don't write or anything like that, but you just see people, and that's how it is. Yeah, so those, and same people from the squadron, you see them on occasions, ring up, talk on the phone. But those, they've been maintained for, 30 odd years, over 30 odd years, 35, 40 years.
Did you have any contacts with the Vietcong?
Me personally, I never had a contact as far as a firefight, but we got chased, followed up, which is a harrowing experience, because people are there but you can't see them.
How did you know they were there?
We could hear them. You could hear, what they used to do is fire signal shots. You'd hear the signal shots, and everywhere we went, they went. And we think that they followed us off the LZ, when we ran into the bush. They obviously were walking past, or it just happened, and they were following us trying. And see, what they try to do is they don't know what they're following either. They know there's an Australian, or there's a patrol of some sort, and you don't know how many of them there was, so it's a bit of a standoff basically, and we got chased up, and I don't know, I still don't know to this day what it was, but there was something coming. I was sort of here and something coming, and it was just, you could hear the movement through the bush, and I still couldn't see it, and that's the frustrating part. Because if you open up, like I could have opened and fired, and whatever it was, bad luck. But the patrol is then compromised, so you've got to be pulled out or whatever. So, and you don't know what it is. It could have been a deer or a monkey or whatever. There was wildlife there, but it sounded too human, and you can't see it, and then it stops and moves back and goes away. So whether it was somebody looking for us, because this was all happening on the same time, and came up to a spot and thought, they'd gone far enough, But sometimes the terrain was such that you could stop and there'd be a track just there where the passage is, 10 yards away. And you'd hear people walking down the track, you might be able to see them. So those sorts of things were sort of happening, but to actually have a firefight, I never got involved in one of those.
Did you have many encounters with wildlife?
Yeah, there was deer. Yeah, had a few encounters. I sort of, because you don't know what to expect, and you're sort of patrolling along and all this, and you see a pair of legs, and you think, shit, you freeze, and you're obviously trained on it, and then they appear the other side of the tree, and it's a deer, old Bambi nearly got blown away. But yeah, and there's troops of monkeys used to go through the trees. And these people were living on these, but their country was, with the Agent Orange and that, and it was defoliated, the old monkeys suffered because all where they used to live up in the trees was all dead, And we were sitting there one day, I was just sitting there, the other guy, and we were watching, and this monkey sort of comes through the trees and swings and grabs the branch, and it's all dead, so it just snapped off, and he went all the way to the ground. Then you could hear him moaning, so he obviously winded himself. But he was a big, obviously the king, the troop leader, if you like. So there was quite a bit of that around.
Were you ever concerned that wildlife would compromise your position? Or?
No, not really, because if you're doing it right, you're part of it. If you sit, it's a bit like even in Australia, if you go and sit in the bush and you're just part of it, the wildlife just come in around you. As though you're part of the deal, But see, when you're out there, we never used to have a shave or anything for days before we went out. Never used shaving cream or deodorant or anything like that for those reasons, for the smell and all that, because so you just blend in. And if you're doing it right, the wildlife, if they know you're not going to hurt them, they just hang around, go off and do their thing. But see, that's what it was. If you're startling wildlife, you're not doing it right either, especially from an SAS patrol.
Did you have to treat any of your patrol members?
Oh yeah, with just different bites, and you always had headaches and things like that because of this, the patrol, strain sort of people. So a lot of headaches and insect bites and that sort of stuff. One guy, I think that was mainly what it was. I never ever had a gunshot wound or anything like that. There was you'd treat people back at camp too, because if the medic wasn't there, someone had cut their fingers or cut their legs or do something like that. Well, there was plenty of medics around to fix them up. All the patrol medics around, and they'd got all the gear. So, and it still probably goes on today. The patrol medics down at SAS probably treat the guys more so than the actual proper medics.
What did you find the most challenging part of these patrols?
Well, just maintaining maintaining your sort of focus, if you like. That was fairly challenging because you had to do that. And when you're maintaining that focus, it leads to sort of, when you stop, you've got to be careful that you don't start going to sleep. If you're sort of maintaining a focus and then all of a sudden that focus has gone away, some people tend to relax, and that's when you sort of get yourself into trouble. So that was pretty difficult to do. For the, say, 5 or 6 days, you've got to be on the ball for the whole time. And that's day and night. Okay, you go to sleep, but you can't be jumping up in the middle of the night, going to have a piss or things like that. It's just not on. You can't be stumbling around because, the enemy used to move around in the night as well, and we saw a few lights at night, and then you go over there and have a look, and it was a track. But they used to move from point A to point B at night with their lanterns and things like that. And if you're stumbling around the middle of the night or yelling out, it becomes a temporary arrangement.
Sounds pretty challenging mentally.
Yeah, well, I think that's what I was looking for. You got that focus, and it's a mental challenge rather than a physical one in some senses, because you're obviously fit enough to do the job and that maintain that fitness, but the mental challenge of it all, and that's what is part of the selection, is that you got to get that mental toughness.
What would be the first thing you look forward to when you got back to the DAT?
I used to look forward to a cold drink, actually. Sometimes the everyman or the salvos were on the helipad when you came in, and they always used to have some cold cordial. And I used to look forward to that, a cold drink. I used to say, I hope the everyman's there, And sure enough, sometimes they'd be there, and they'd give you a nice cold drink, and you'd have that. But then after that, you'd sort of be looking for a shower. It was just just sort of maintenance again. You come back, take off your gear, get all your gear, hand all your ammo back in, make sure, clean your weapon, make sure that was all a go, maintain your gear, have a look, if it's broken, fix it, if it's not, just have it ready, wash your clothes, make sure your gear's, that sort of stuff's all washed, and then shower, have a shower, and then, but in between all that, you'd have to have a debrief. We'd be debriefed by the intelligence officers. That's when you'd sit down and go over the whole 5 or 6 days, what you'd seen, what you hadn't seen, if you'd seen anything, who were they, what were they doing, what were they dressed in, all that information. Now, they used to just compile all that and send it off to the task force for the intelligence analysts. The problem that I thought we had was, you'd see something, like a patrol would see something that was significant that maybe a battalion-sized group could nullify. You'd pass that back. The battalion group wouldn't go out there for 4 or 5 days. By the time they got their self together or got their orders to go, and by the time they got out there, whatever it was had gone. And so then it was, those bloody SAS based, don't know what they're talking about. If they had gone within the hour or the next day latest, there might have been something there, If you're seeing a whole lot of people walking in one particular direction, they've got to be all going somewhere.
What was your relationship like with the battalions?
Oh, we never had much of a relationship. I had with Graham, my mate, because he was in 7th Battalion, and there was blokes that you knew from, when you joined and that was the relationship. And you could go down to their boozer on occasion and have a drink. But the relationships with the battalion as such, sort of, there wasn't much of a one. They had their job to do, we did ours, and they got on with it, and so did we. But so you had those personal relationships with blokes, but so whether the commanding officers, obviously they would have had a relationship of some sort, them, the SAS being the reconnaissance people, whether they want them to do anything or whatever. But other than that, there was nothing.
I don't suppose you look forward to getting back to the DAT and getting rowdy, did you? Breaking the silence.
Well, yeah, I guess, I never sort of thought about that much. No, because when as you get up to where you're being pulled out, you're sitting on the side of the LZ waiting for the helicopters to come in, and then you throw smoke to mark your spot, or we used to have marker panels or a mirror, and then sort of the choppers had come banging in, really good sound, the old Huey, and you get on that and there's all that racket going on, and then if you're talking to one another in the helicopter going back, so you've got to shout, but most of the time you never talk, you just sat there, and then you just get off the helicopter, and I mean, it sounded a bit strange, but I mean, I never used to think about it that much, basically. I mean, you never sort of got off the helicopter and thought, oh, good, I can talk now. You know, you never did that. Well, I didn't anyway. So it wasn't either here or there. It was just that you knew that you spoke in sign language out the bush, and when you were in there, you spoke normally, you know.
I would have thought you'd want to let your yah-yahs out when you got back.
Yeah, well, that's what we used to do. There was always a carton of beer for the patrol that came in because of the beer that they missed when they were out. But also we had that, but also we used to go down to 9 Squadron. We had that night down there, so you'd go down there, and generally you'd sort of get sort of a bit Brahms and Liszt in that, or you could go into Vung Tau, go to the bars, have a massage or whatever, sauna. I just like having saunas because we get all the crap out of you. Yeah, so there was all that sort of thing going on, and that was sort of like your end of patrol sort of thing, and then you go back from that and then just get back into a normal routine, camp routine, just work parties, doing bits and pieces around the place, making furniture for your tent, anything like that. There might be other little jobs around that, like, as I said, I went down to the Peter Badco Club and worked down there for a week or 2 weeks, I can't remember what it was. I know I went down and gave some first aid lectures to the South Vietnamese Army where the training team were. We were asked to go down there. The training team guys were running it, but they asked us to do give them a first aid lecture, you know, on CPR and stuff like that. Yeah, so those are the sort of things you did. You might have get a job at go to the orphanages. There used to be a few around the place. Build little huts and all different things like that on a day-to-day basis.
When did you finish your tour?
I was medevaced home. I was injured.
How were you injured?
I fell off a moving truck, and smashed the vertebrae in my back. I was medevaced home halfway through the tour. It's supposed to have been a 12-month tour. I was medevaced home, spent a bit of time in the military hospital in Sydney. Then I shipped out from there and came to Hollywood Hospital. And that basically, that injury sort of ended my military career. Not at that point, but it was the start of it, you know. And my services in SAS diminished because of it. Yeah, and it took them 4 years to find out what was wrong.
How did the accident occur?
Oh, I was just on a truck, and you know how they pull forward, you go back in the camp, crashed to the ground. I can't remember if I had gear on or not.
Why were you on the back of the truck?
Oh, we were just going somewhere, I think. Yeah, there was nothing significant about it. It was just there. Or we're coming back from somewhere.
We're coming back from the boozer.
No, I don't think so. No, I wasn't pissed. Or if I had been, it probably wouldn't have hurt. Yeah, because drunks always get away with falling from great heights. But no, that's what happened. I ended up in hospital in Vietnam.
Which one?
Field hospital in Vung Tau.
How long were you there?
I was there for about 2 weeks before that.
What sort of treatment did you get there?
Yeah, I was just x-rays, putting ice on your back. I had some American orthopaedic surgeons look at the x-rays, and I think they were the ones that decided that I should go home, you know. I didn't particularly want to go home. I thought that after they got the swelling down and all that sort of stuff that I might be all right, you know. But anyway, they decided that I wasn't staying there, and I think it was because of the job that I was doing, because they did say to me, what do you do, you know, and I told them, so I'm with the SAS regiment, and they didn't know what that was, but I saw an Australian doctor telling them, and then they said, oh, well, I think you better be medevaced home, and I said, oh, let me go home now. No, yeah, but anyway, that's how it happened, and I ended up back here in Australia. I went back to the regiment.
What was the journey like home?
I can't remember a lot of it. It was a medevac flight which was set up, a Hercules aircraft with beds set up. It was a purpose aircraft, and what they did was they flew from Vung Tau to Butterworth in Malaysia, where you stayed overnight in Malaysia. In Butterworth, they had like an Air Force hospital in Butterworth. Oh no, I think we stayed there for 2 days. I'm not sure. Yeah, it was more than one anyway. And it was just like a recuperation and after the flight that far. So you stayed there in hospital, and then they put you back on the plane, and we flew to Richmond in New South Wales, which is just out of Sydney. And then I was transported off that plane to the military hospital in Ingleburn.
I just wanted to ask you before we talk about, you know, you coming back in the hospitals. Did you have regular mail contact?
Yeah. It was supposedly regular. But when the wharfies went on strike, or the posties went on strike, and it was all about the Vietnam War, the mail never came. I mean, there was a slogan there at one stage, punch a postie and all that stuff. I mean, and that was because, you know, they'd go out on strike in support of something to do with the Vietnam War or whatever. And I mean, or the wharfies would go on strike, and that meant the supply ship, the Parrot, that used to go up and down with supplies and that, you wouldn't get them. But in the main, it wasn't too bad. The regular mail, you'd get mail. I mean, it was better when you came back off patrol, because all your mail had sort of banked up, and so you'd have a heap of mail to read.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah, I mean, even though you didn't think about it, but when it was there, it was good. Yeah, so, yeah, I guess you could say there was a regular sort of mail there, but occasionally it faltered.
Was music at all part of life on SAS Hill?
Yeah. I mean, I thought, you know, everybody had a tape deck or some description, and, you know, there was the American Forces radio that used to be on. People used to be playing that all the time. And I mean, it was all, and the music you hear now from that era reminds me immediately of it, you know. And I mean, that movie Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams, I mean, that had a lot of music that reminded me of that time, you know. And that type of music it does. A lot of James Brown stuff does, and yeah, so and it was just through those mediums, you know, like the Forces radio, and in those days, you know, Akai was a pretty big seller, and that had reel-to-reel tapes, you know, all those sorts of things, and people used to record music, but yeah, I mean, people used to listen to that 60s type music, yeah.
Were there any messages about drugs for the Americans?
I can't remember any, but I think they denied that existed at that time, in 69, 70, you know. I don't think they wanted to face that problem within their forces, because that's a lot of their problems escalated around that time, and, you know, the drugs were coming out of there, and I don't think they just wanted to face how rife it was within their service. I can't remember, I can't remember anything on the radio about it, but that's not to say there wasn't, you know.
What evidence did you see for drugs being used by the Americans?
Oh, I used to see them with marijuana a lot, you know, especially in Vung Tau, or you'd smell it. Some of the units that were all American, like the artillery unit that wasn't far from us, that I was talking about earlier. I mean, if you wandered by that area, you know, you'd smell the stuff. I mean, and I don't think there was any shortage of it from what I could see. Any hard drugs I never sort of got involved in or seen, like heroin and that, but I'm sure it was around. But sort of marijuana and stuff you see quite a bit.
How was the use of drugs dealt with by the Australian forces?
Well, see, the use of drugs never came up for me, and I never saw anybody that it needed to come up of. Whether there was guys doing drugs, I don't know, there could have been. I can't say that anybody in our squadron did, and I can't remember anybody doing it. I can't remember anybody being charged or anything over the drugs or the use of drugs at that time. I wouldn't say, I'd say there was probably a few guys experimented whilst down at Vung Tau or on leave or whatever, but I mean, it's one of those things, you know, if you want to do it, fine, but don't include me. So I think there was that attitude with our guys, and they weren't interested in the main, you know. It gets back to this, I mean, you don't want to be fuddled when you're supposed to be operating. So it never became an issue that I knew of for me.
Do you think the Americans had less of a duty of care for their own personal well-being than the Australians then?
Well, I think so. I think it came through a lack of discipline, lack of training, and that whole range of things. I mean, you know, how many times you hear people say, oh, the Americans used to go through the bush with their radios on and all that sort of thing. I didn't ever see any evidence of that, but it wouldn't surprise me, given their lack of. I mean, what you've got is you've got a conscript that's all they've done is recruit training, and they ship them to Vietnam, where they probably do a bit of in-country training to get them up to scratch for Vietnam. They do it there, and then they're sent out, and they're supposed to be soldiers. I mean, I don't think it cuts it. I mean, all they are is civilians dressed up in soldiers' outfits because they're training, and that's through no fault of theirs. I mean, it's the training procedure. You know, it's just like a factory. And I mean, their regular people were obviously better because they'd been around, they'd been trained properly. But in this instance, a lot of the conscripts were just cannon fodder.
Does it bother you at all how Americans are portrayed in their own movies about Vietnam and their involvement in Vietnam?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, if that's what they want to do. I mean, there's obviously a lot of their people were good people and good soldiers, etc., etc. And they portray the movies to show Americans as being good people. It doesn't bother me one way or the other. I mean, you see things that are a bit, what would you call them, a bit far-fetched.
What's far-fetched in your mind?
Well, I mean, some of the things that they do, I'm just trying to think. But one of the better movies I saw was that one with Mel Gibson called Once Were Soldiers. That wasn't a bad movie, you know. I mean, you know, when they were, yeah, it was pretty hell, you know, they even though they might have won the day, but they took a fair beating and it was only because of they had firepower, air power, things like that. But that wasn't a bad movie. But some of the movies I've seen with Americans, you just wonder if that really happened. You know, wandered through the scrub smoking and chewing gum, and what I can never come to terms with is these people, like Americans, and I've seen some Australian movies, walking through the bush with their sleeves rolled up. You know, that never happened. I mean, especially with an infantry soldier, because you know that your arms shine in the daytime. You know, and you have your sleeves rolled down, not only to stop mosquito bites, etc., and the bugs biting you, but that's a form of camouflage. I mean, you have your sleeves down because the sun on your arm is like a mirror. That's one of the things you learn in bushcraft, you know. You see, we used to do bushcraft. You'd see they'd sit a guy in a bush and he'd have his face to the sun, and it'd be like a mirror, shining, you know, his face, especially. And that goes, it doesn't matter what colour your skin is. I mean, it used to be funny, you'd see, we had a couple of, when we were doing our infantry training, a couple of people from the Solomon Islands, a young fella, Aboriginal guys, and they'd be put on camouflage cream, you know, and they'd say, oh, how come? But it's skin, you know, it was shining, it doesn't matter what colour it was, you know. So, this business that you see in the movies where they parading around the scrub doing that, you know, I just think it's just not on. Those sort of things. But, I mean, other than that, you just, you know, I mean, you're used to seeing it nowadays, so it just goes over your head.
Is there any particular movie about Vietnam that you've looked at and you thought, what a piece of crap?
Oh, yeah, there's heaps. But just offhand, I can't really tell you. I mean, some of the things, I mean, that Deer Hunter, I mean, that was, I don't know if you saw that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that sort of stuff, but...
Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, well, see, that there, I mean, whether that went on, I mean, they were supposed to be based on some American colonel, but I mean, if you're letting your soldiers carry on like that, I mean, what sort of an army are you running, you know? And some of the things that went on, you know, you just got to think, well, did that happen, you know? And if it did, what were they? Who was running the show when it did, you know?
Who was in charge?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so all those sorts of things, you know. I mean, you just sort of think, well, and then, you know, as I say, you just get used to seeing that rubbish, and you go and see it and forget about it, you know. I mean, as I say, one of the better movies I've seen was that one with Mel Gibson. That was based on a true story, and that guy that led that battalion, he was an American military man, and his wife, she only died last month, I think. I saw it in a news beat somewhere that she'd just died, Mrs. Moore. Yeah, so, that was a pretty... and I can just imagine the Americans, you know, like when all the guys were dying, they're turning up in a yellow cab with a telegram to tell their wife that their husband was dead, you know, had been killed in Vietnam, you know. I mean, they just didn't know what was happening, you know. All of a sudden they got these guys over there dying, and they've got nobody to go and tell the wives, except a yellow cab with a Western Union telegram, you know. And this Mrs. Moore, she organised. She said, you bring all the telegrams to me, and I'll take them around. Yeah, so, I mean, that doesn't surprise me, given the way the system was, the American system, or what it appeared to be.
So with your accident and falling off the back of a truck, it must have been quite disappointing for you to have this accident and for your tour to be cut short.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible. I mean, it's still... I still think about it every day, basically. I mean, there's nothing worse than training with people and being with them all the time, and then sort of leaving halfway through the job. Yeah, there's nothing worse, I think.
Was that worse than the injury itself?
Well, I think so. I mean, because you're just pulling away, and you're coming back here. All the people that you've been with for the last 2 years are still there. I mean, you're still in the military and everything, but everybody that you've ever sort of been close to for the last 2 years are all still there. It wasn't a very good time.
So did you feel a bit like a shag on a rock?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Sort of, yeah, you just don't know what to do with yourself. I mean, you come back here, you go back down there, down to Swanbourne. I mean, all the people that you train with and all that are away still. The people, a couple of the guys that from the other squadrons, you just know a few of them, and you got to get to know the other ones. I mean, because of the injury, you're still under treatment. They don't know what to do with you either. So you're just sort of bouncing around, you're in limbo, you don't know what's going on. And that's pretty disappointing.
So when you say you're bouncing around, are you reporting to base?
Yeah.
And then just being put on light duties?
Yeah, well, there was that. You end up with a job in one of the offices, but then you're sort of taking medical appointments and X-rays, and because as I say, it took them 4 years to find out what was wrong. And then finally, they still never found out what was wrong, and as I say, until 4 years later. But in that time, you don't know what. You're all over the place,
Hard to make plans for the future.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you don't know what you're doing.
Did you write to some of the blokes back in Vietnam?
No, I didn't. As I said, I'm not a very good letter writer.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't write. There was a couple of. I'm sure one of the guys I saw when he came home in R&R and things like that, but I just can't remember that period as to how things went. I mean, when the squadron came back, they came back. There was guys drifting back all the time, and they were sort of going all over the place. But yeah, it was just one of those things I didn't do,
What did you do when the squadron did come back?
They came back, yeah. I sort of teamed up with some of the guys then, but you just felt a bit left out, and you'd sort of go out and see them, and there was a squadron function to come back, and I mean, I think it was just me basically. You just feel a bit left out because they'd finished and you didn't, and in the end, I sort of I just wanted to go away again, so I applied for another posting and went to Singapore, and went there for 2 years.
And what was the posting in Singapore?
I went to one of the battalions. I went to 6th Battalion, and they were looking for some reinforcements. They wanted 6 people. I stuck my hand up and went. So I was stationed in Singapore for 2 years. By that stage I was married, so we went and lived over there for 2 years.
And what was daily life like in Singapore?
Oh, it was good, yeah. Basically pretty laid back, it was just to show the flag exercise basically, because Australia had a commitment to Malaysia and Singapore, still after the Malay emergency as it was called. So that commitment was still there, and this was part of that commitment. And so you'd go and have an exercise and all that in Malaysia and things like that. But it was, as I say, a flag showing exercise. You do that, and then basically day-to-day stuff back at camp, which wasn't a lot. The rifle companies would be off doing exercises. There was a lot of sports days in competition with the other, because there was an English battalion, a New Zealand battalion and an Australian battalion, so there was a lot of interaction there with sports and things like that, and that's how that posting was, you know. And that's how it stayed for the whole 2 years. You sort of sporting activities, bloody competitions, exercises in Malaysia. Used to do a lot of hearts and minds stuff, you know, like going to orphanages over there in Singapore. We sort of helped run a few stalls and that for the orphanage at different, like an air show. They had a Singapore air show. I remember running a stall for one of them. And yeah, so that was just basically life in Singapore. So it wasn't very taxing. But it wasn't until, and our son was born in Singapore, and when I came back from Singapore, that's when they found out what was wrong with me back. After all that time, so I went to a battalion. It was on and off pain all the time, but I came back and I went back to SAS, and I had to do a refresher parachute course. You got to do, because you got to maintain your currency. And I went to Williamtown and did 4 jumps, and my back collapsed again, you know. So I came home, and anyway, they did a few tests, and that's when they found the cracks in the vertebrae. What it was, there was 3 or 4 vertebrae with hairline cracks in them, and the actual fluid within the vertebrae was leaking out onto the spinal cord, and that's what was creating the pain.
The vertebrae don't actually mend?
No, they don't. They just, I don't know why they didn't mend. So anyway, they opened me up and put a bit of glue on them or something. I don't know what they did. But I think they must have, I don't know what they did. They said they were going to, they explained what it was, and they said we're going to go and repair it. So how they repaired it, I don't know, but it stopped the pain, but it's still there if I lift anything, and I've got to just be really careful.
So that pretty much ended your career right there and then?
Yeah, that was it, basically, and I just sort of soldiered on for another couple of years, going nowhere.
That must have been pretty frustrating
for you.
Well,
it was. I mean, I was going to be I was a professional soldier, as far as I was concerned, and that's, you know, you get an injury in Vietnam. That's why I'm so vehement about governments looking after people, because for 20 years they never looked after me. I had that injury, and I sort of then was sort of basically not forced, but you were made to be aware that maybe your services were no longer required. You know? Well, basically, I went back to SAS, and the director of Infantry, I went and had an interview with him, and he said, well, listen, you're not going to be ever... He said, basically, you're staying here, you're holding up promotion. I said, oh, thanks very much. Stick it up your arse. And I mean, so that was sort of out of SAS, where I wanted to be anyway. And I went to Army recruiting, and I was there recruiting people for a while. And then I pulled the pin. Because if you can, there's nothing worse than being in a job and part of the job you can't do. And so that was that, you know. On top of all the other stuff that you came home and felt as though you'd sort of half finished the job and all that sort of stuff, and then you get told that, and you've got all that sort of stuff going on, and then they find out what's wrong with you, and then you're operated on, and then you come back after the operation, and you're told that, you know, and then for all intents and purposes you're told to nick off. So I did, and got out, and that ended my military career, which I still think was premature, unfortunately.
Do you think if they handled it better, or with today's sort of appreciation, that it would have changed?
Probably not, because the same thing's happening.
So you're saying that progress has not been made?
No. I mean, a classic example is one of the young fellows in the Black Hawk wheels. He's paralysed from the waist down, but there's a role he could fill within the Defence Force. I mean, in the day and age of computers and analysis and all this sort of stuff, he could fill a role within the Defence Force. After all the training he had with the SAS regiment and the high money that they've spent on your bike. And they do that to too many people. And that's what's happening. I mean, there's a role that these people, and it's not only in SAS, it's other areas of the Defence Force. They spend thousands and thousands, in some cases millions, training people. And then, because they get an injury of some description and they can't be what is classed as fit everywhere, or they reckon everybody's got to be able to deploy overseas if a war came. I mean, that's crap. I mean, you don't send everybody overseas in a war. I mean, who's back here? Minding the store, basically. So these guys have got a role to play, and yet they'd prefer to medically discharge them. So what you've got out there is a lot of disgruntled ex-servicemen who feel as though they've been shortchanged. And it's affecting them and their families because of that anger, etc.
So this is your choice of battle that you choose to fight?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I make sure that the people are looked after compensation-wise through Department of Veteran Affairs or military compensation, and you bring to the fore, you highlight those sorts of things and say, well, why do you do it, And I mean, they come up with some cock and bull answer, which has just got holes in it, and you just keep highlighting that, If you make progress, you do. If you don't, you don't. But at least you're not going to give up, and you'll go down trying,
Sounds like you've been extremely persistent over the years.
Yeah, I have. And I have a system where blokes that are now made TPI through the Department of Veteran Affairs, which is totally and permanently incapacitated. A lot of those guys have got superannuation policies, and part of that superannuation policy, or part of everybody's superannuation policy, is if you get hurt and can't go to work, there's a TPD section in your superannuation, which means it just about doubles your super. It's a total and permanent disablement payment. What it is that they pay your super. If you're disabled and can't go to work, they actually pay you in a lump sum your super as though you reach 65. Now, the insurance companies hate paying that section. And they did it to me, and I beat the state government. Anyway, I get a lot of people now coming to see me to help them. And over the last few years, had they got away with it, they would have shortchanged the troops about $3 million. But we beat them. So that's what we do now.
You mentioned before that your good mate is Graham Richardson.
Graham Edwards.
Sorry, Graham Edwards.
Yeah.
How has he helped you with your fight?
Oh, he does what he can. Graham's got his own ghosts and all that sort of stuff. But we're good friends, and I'll run things by him, and I go out and work with him on a once a week basis. And we discuss things, both along the defence line and the veterans stuff. I mean, if there's a question that needs to be asked to the Minister for Veteran Affairs, he's not backward in asking it. And it's quite comforting that you can write some of those questions. One of the things I did just recently, well, I did it 18 months ago, but it just recently come out as part of this new election promise from the Labor government, was that they a defence volunteer medal, It means that everybody that volunteered for service with 3 or more years, they will get what they call a volunteer medal. Basically, the reason I put that to him, and he wasn't that keen, but we put it up and they accepted it as part of their policy. And the government jumped in prior to them announcing and said that they were going to do it, and but you had to have 6 years service, which to me is a crock, because the minimum engagement was 3 years for people, 3 or 6. And in some cases, the Navy girls was 4 or 6. So my argument to them, and was for them to accept the 3-year thing, was that why is a Navy girl's service any less valuable to the country? Her 4 years that she did diligently and signed on and stuck her hand, why is it any less valuable to the country than someone that did 6? And also, the females of the time, in the 70s, the 60s and 70s, if they were married, they had to get out. If they, then it came that they could stay in when they were married, but if they got pregnant, they had to get out. So some of them might have did 4 or 5 years and got married and got out. Their service any less valuable to the country? I don't think so. So that's how I did it and wrote that up. And they accepted it, so it's good, so it's a little win. Well, that's if they, but to get that through, there'd have to be a complete change of government and all that, but I would like to think that they will amend the policy that the current government have put through. If it doesn't, if they don't change it, they amend it to 3. But, there's a lot of people that were injured and had to be discharged. They might have only done 2 or 3 years. It's through no fault of their own. A guy that went to Vietnam, he might have been a regular soldier. He's trained for 12 months, gone with the battalion, gets wounded and discharged. He's only done 18 months. He's been to a war and been wounded. Why is his service any less valuable?
Considering the fact that you're pretty passionate about, veterans' rights and how they're placed within the system, how important is Anzac Day to you?
Oh, it's pretty important. Anzac Day, I think, I'd like to see it sort of out there a bit more. It's good to see that the local state government here have now made it compulsory in all state schools to have an Anzac service. Now, whether that's before Anzac Day or after Anzac Day, that doesn't matter as long as it's there. I make it my business to make myself available to go and talk to the kids. Last year I did. I was in Roleystone High School and Gosnells Primary and a couple others. And you just go along there and you don't have to tell worries, you just tell them, like one I did, how the evolution of the dawn service came about, I mean, they just think it's, a lot of school kids think, well, why do you have a dawn service? So I told them, and there's a thing about that. And so you just go and tell them things about that, and the conditions that the guys that landed on Gallipoli, what they actually encountered, rather than tell them how they jumped and run into bullets and all that. Tell them about what it was like sitting in the boat, going there. I mean, nobody ever talks about that. And I know they've been shitting themselves, but you don't tell the little kids that, but just get them to say, well, how would you, and these kids at Roleystone High School, I said, these guys that were sitting in their boat were only a year older than you. I said, how would you feel in a year's time sitting in a boat knowing you're going to be running up a beach with a lot of people shooting at you? It's not a very good thought, but so I make it my business to do that, and I think there should be more made of Anzac Day.
More from an educational level within the school system. Yeah,
not as a glorification, but more as an education, because there could be a lot of type of education come out of it, that in the future may have people think again when there's got to be a war.
Well, Eric, you've certainly got my mind thinking, and you've come out with some really good points. I just want to thank you so much for talking with us today.
Oh, that's my pleasure. It is.